I love to see a full room. It's very heartwarming, and I think about 90% of the faces I know. So for those I don't know, please come to me during the coffee break. I'd love to get to know you. We are here to talk about animal welfare, but not alone. We make systematically the correlation between animal welfare and animal health. And quoting, not a famous author, but quoting paragraph 8 in a new European animal health law that says that animal health is a precondition to animal welfare, and vice versa. But it's good to acknowledge both vice versas because they are totally linked, and I think I really like the title my new comms director chose, that is different roles, same goal. She always likes to play with words and make them rhyme. So I think we found a very good title. And today you'll have some eminent speakers, not always maybe with the same approach. And this is what we're trying to achieve with our annual events. It's not to always preach to the converted, it's to have a dialogue. And if we agree to disagree, that's fine with us. But I think talking, exchanging, and knowing each other's points of view is essential, and that's what we're going to do today. I won't take a much longer time, and thank you, Claire, for writing a speech for me that I'm not at all following, as usual, but I feel more comfortable knowing I have something I can hang on to. I will just right away pass over the event to our moderator, Florence Rançon, who's not only an excellent moderator, but a friend. So, you know, things happen. And I'm very happy to have her here with us today. And in fact, she's one of the moderators also of the Commission's EU Animal Welfare Today and Tomorrow event. So, I mean, she's totally delved into our topics. And without further delay, I'll give Florence the floor. And I wanted really to get up on this stage, but I just can't. My hips and my knees don't allow me to, so apologies that I'm not higher on the stand, but maybe I could get up, but I'm not sure I could have come down. So thank you, and really enjoy the day, and please network, talk to each other, and especially talk with the panelists and the people that will be, yes, Andrea, that will be up there, and hope you have a great morning. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot, Roxanne. Indeed, it's going to be a challenge for all of you having to step up on that stage because it is quite a high step. So be careful. We don't want anybody hurting themselves. We're going to try and be careful. Maybe we can find a step somewhere in the meantime. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Florence Rançon. I will be your moderator for this morning. And I'm delighted to be here. It is indeed the kind of topic that I deal with on a regular basis and enjoy very much, far from being an expert, but it's always great to hear everybody's point of view, and that's what we're going to try and do this morning. Not only the point of view of the speakers we're going to be having here as keynote speakers or on our panels, but we also would like to have an exchange with you. So we're going to ask you during or throughout the panel discussions. I'm going to turn to you on various occasions to ask you for your contributions, not lengthy comments, that's not what we are after, but we would like really to have questions from you, to have a regular dialogue between you and the panelists so that there's a real discussion. And as Roxanne pointed out, we may agree to disagree. That is not a problem. We know where we are, we know where everybody stands, but it's very important to keep the dialogue open. So we will definitely this morning highlight how intricate the relationship is between health, good health, and well-being. There's not one without the other, and it goes both ways. And today, the background, the origin, and the condition of the animals that consumers buy for consumption is extremely important. It plays a more and more important role, and more consumers are very eager to know the background of the animals. It's part of their regular preoccupations. Of course, the EU is very closely monitoring and promoting animal welfare, and as the legislation is being reviewed, and that's also one of the things we're going to discuss this morning, today's conference will really examine how we're all related to that revision and how the revision can be optimized, hopefully, with more consultation and more input from all sides. If you would like to promote the discussion, comment, quote, whatever, please feel free to do so on social media using the hashtag #AnimalHealthForWelfare. Animal health for the figure welfare. It's on the slides. Well, it's not on this one. Yes, it is, at the bottom. Sorry, I didn't even see it. I'm too close. So animal health for welfare. So feel free and do share and continue the discussion online. Start it now and continue it throughout the day if you'd like. We're very happy to continue exchanging with you after the event as well. There's no good animal health without dedicated vets. We all know that. And I'd like to invite you to hear the testimony of one of them. He's a senior veterinarian, and he's the author of Through a Vet's Eyes. So he will really share with us his experience as a vet and his insight, his personal insight. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sean Wensley to explain to us how vets do contribute to providing not only good physical health, but good mental health for animals as well, to contribute to their welfare. Sean Wensley. It is high, isn't it?
Well, morning, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to be able to speak to you today to give a veterinarian's perspective on the journey towards a kinder future for kept animals in Europe and the interplay between animal health and animal welfare in reaching that goal. The evolution in thinking in animal welfare away from a narrow focus on physical health and productivity to a broad consideration of animal well-being is one that I've been close to during my career as a veterinarian, and I think is very useful to consider in the context of the European Union's vision for animal welfare. I'll draw particularly on my experiences from the British Veterinary Association in the UK, which is home, and my more recent time with the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe, FVE, working at the European level. Part of the prompt for my being invited to address the meeting today was the publication of my book, Through a Vet's Eyes, How We Can All Choose a Better Life for Animals, which gives insights for a non-specialist audience into how veterinarians in practice and policy, together with others, are improving the lives of farmed animals, companion animals, animals in sport, and wild animals impacted by human activity. The book has a core of nature writing, and it opens here on the Sefton coast, just north of Liverpool, where I grew up. And it describes that area's beautiful biodiversity, such as characterful red squirrels, endangered natterjack toads, and exquisite bee orchids. And the reasons for my setting the book's main animal welfare theme in the context of the natural world were threefold. First, to attempt to convey a sense of authenticity, to try to build a relationship as a lifelong naturalist with the reader, and hopefully trust. The animal welfare harms that I discuss in the book are conveyed through my first-hand accounts as a vet, so it's important to be considered genuine and credible. The second aim, which recurs through the chapters, is to move from the human world, with its troubles and challenges, to the non-human world with its space and beauty. And this was to include the natural world for its well-documented capacities to support reflection and psychological restoration. And the third purpose was to help remind particularly through close behavioral observation, that our domesticated species have an evolutionary origin and they retain evolved, highly internally motivated behaviors that they really need to do, and the expression of which are central to their well-being when under human stewardship. Excuse me. And domestic pigs, for example, as well as being intelligent, are highly motivated to root and to build a nest before farrowing. A valuable starting point for considering animal welfare and ethics is to remind ourselves of the fundamental anatomical, physiological, and morally relevant similarities between humans and the animals we use for our benefit. And the book begins by recalling a vet school anatomy class, by going on to describe the comparative anatomy that was revealed to us when we dissected dogs in those classes, and using that as a stepping stone to exploring the broader matter of sentience, we can relay, for the avoidance of any doubt, the scientific and legal consensus that animals from many classes are sentient, that all of us, whether human, reptile, fish or bird, can be considered simply as a wrapper or a vehicle for the central capacity to feel things and to consciously experience feelings that matter to us, such as pain, fear, comfort, and enjoyment. And this common capacity and kinship means that we can't simply use animals as though they weren't sentient, even if historically that is what we have done. Sentience confers a moral responsibility on those who want to use sentient animals for benefits such as food, companionship, sport. And broadly speaking, that moral response may be one of two kinds. We can either take an abolitionist animal rights view, arguing that sentient animals have a right not to be exploited for human gain, or an animal welfare-based view, where it's deemed acceptable to use animals so long as they have a good life and a humane death. Both are coherent and valid worldviews. And the animal welfare-based view tends to prevail within the veterinary profession and broader society. But while it's a simple ethical prescription that's depicted in this slide, we know from our everyday clinical experience and published surveys that many kept animals don't have their welfare needs met, and there are a number of persisting animal welfare problems in the world. Society's focus, and particularly the veterinary professions, must be to rectify these problems. But sometimes, after exhaustive allocation of resources, time, and money, it may be concluded that a given activity is fundamentally incompatible with a good life and can no longer be considered as justifiable. The British Veterinary Association's view on that point, agreed in 2021, is that there's a limit to acceptable animal welfare compromises associated with each area of animal use. And if these limits are reached and cannot be adequately addressed, the veterinary profession will oppose that use or practice. BVA and FVE's opposition to the use of performing wild animals in travelling circuses gives an example of that point. Securing a good life for animals and ongoing citizen support for animal use in society requires our providing for the animal's physical health and mental well-being. Physical health is the foundation, as we've heard, the foundation of good welfare, but does not secure good welfare by itself. It's necessary, but not sufficient. When an animal's physical health is poor, their welfare is poor, But when an animal's physical health is good, their welfare may still be poor. And this can be illustrated by applying the 5 needs welfare assessment framework to the case of Lady, who was a dog that my now wife and I had cause to visit on several occasions in her home. Lady was vaccinated, received regular preventive parasite treatments, was fed a high-quality, veterinary-recommended diet, and was walked for 2 hours each day. Each time we visited the house, Lady was in this crate. Initially, that gave us no cause for concern. Crates can provide a place of security for dogs, particularly if they have the choice to enter and leave. But eventually, we realized that we'd never seen Lady out of her crate. And it turned out that besides her 2 one-hour walks, she was permanently crated. This wasn't due to her owner being intentionally cruel, but was because when she was a puppy, she ingested a foreign object and required surgery. And her loving owner was so worried that the same might happen again at some point in the future, she chose to keep her near permanently caged. So applying the 5 needs framework, we can see that excellent provision was being made for Lady's physical health through her health care and her diet, but her needs for a suitable environment, companionship, and to behave normally were not being met, leading to poor welfare overall. And similarly, using the 5 domains welfare assessment framework, which is a similar framework but puts an important focus on mental state. Her environment and behavior domains would be associated with negative feelings in the mental domain due to her social isolation, confinement, and understimulation. There are many sectors and professions who can help improve animal welfare, some of whom are shown here, and including all of us here today. But by virtue of our everyday contact with animal keepers and owners, our scientific and ethical foundations, and the public trust we are currently afforded and don't take for granted, the veterinary profession's opportunity and responsibility to advance animal welfare may be the greatest of all. And it's been my stock in trade over the last decade or so to help explore how this might effectively be brought to bear. Veterinary and animal ethics are complex areas, and my prevailing aim during time spent in particular with PDSA, the charity I work for, BVA and FVE, has been not to attempt to marshal the world towards a predetermined viewpoint, but rather work towards establishing consensus and moving forwards as a profession together. I'll say a few words about how this landscape has been navigated with some species-specific examples and give a sense of where I think we are now and of some potential future directions. A secure anchor and starting point is our professional declaration, which in the UK, with similar repeated internationally, states that, above all, my constant endeavour will be to ensure the health and welfare of animals committed to my care. Veterinarians and veterinary nurses abide by this day in and day out. But how does this optimising of animal welfare within the status quo of present-day animal use tally with a wider role for the profession to question and, where necessary, challenge that status quo? Some years ago, a UK veterinarian, Professor Bill Riley, wrote that if veterinary professionals are present when slaughter without pre-stunning is occurring, a practice which incurs a severe welfare harm on animals and happens legally for religious purposes, and don't seek to challenge the practice, then we are complicit, we veterinarians are complicit with that harm. His advocacy on that topic led to BVA's high-profile and ongoing campaign to seek an end to non-stun slaughter. But it also highlighted the principle that vets must speak up and speak out about compromised animal welfare, whatever form it takes. Lest, not least, we risk being characterized by society as facilitators of systemic animal harm. Channeling that veterinary voice in 2016, BVA published its first animal welfare strategy for the UK profession, Vets Speaking Up for Animal Welfare. And this followed another exercise, the 2015 Vet Futures Report, also developed through extensive profession-wide consultation, which had articulated the following moral principle. We, vets, are clear about our duty to champion animal welfare more broadly across society, beyond the bounds of animals under our direct care, and to challenge activities that compromise animal welfare. And BVA's animal welfare strategy laid out further valuable principles. One, that vets are rightfully animal welfare focused, as opposed to client or industry focused or business focused. We must have positive, empathic, supportive, motivating relations with clients and industries. It's essential. And we must charge appropriately and unashamedly to remain commercially viable. But these are enablers for achieving our overriding, motivating objective of improving animal welfare. Two, as we've rehearsed, that physical health and mental well-being are both essential to animal welfare. And this accords with the World Organization for Animal Health's definition of animal welfare, which is the physical and mental state of an animal in relation to the conditions in which it lives and dies. And three, it noted the shift in societal and legal focus away from simply spurring animals, the worst of being under human stewardship, towards actively promoting positive welfare states and the animals experiencing a good life. During my time as chair of the FVE Animal Welfare Working Group, developing animal welfare policy for the veterinary profession across Europe, we also articulated these principles, stating, for example, in our 2020 revised policy position on animal welfare with the American and Canadian veterinary medical associations, that kept animals should experience a good life and a humane death. And in our first animal welfare strategy, the Veterinary Voice for Europe's Animals, published last September, that the profession's overall primary aim is to help make the world a better place for animals. Both BVA and FVE's animal welfare strategies have a strong focus on veterinary animal welfare advocacy at individual, community, national and international levels. And both strategies committed the associations to developing the policy positions that would underpin that advocacy in collaboration with species specialist colleagues and associations. So this ensures that the latest expert evidence is incorporated. Our colleagues and the species divisions, of course, are immersed and embedded in the industries that they work with, and also so that specialist associations can then disseminate published recommendations to those communities and sectors. And a first step was to agree the welfare problems on which it was felt the associations should take a leadership role in highlighting and addressing. And the FVE General Assembly, with those specialist associations' full input, agreed a long list, which necessarily had to be prioritised, of 152 such problems across Europe. These are 152 hurdles to fulfilling the ethical prescription of a good life and a humane death for kept animals. And we should keep in mind 152 welfare risks to the ongoing granting of social license to use animals for human benefit. So I'll give some examples of those problems from farmed species, together with examples of veterinary action to date. Some of the first policy positions off the back of the animal welfare strategies focused on mutilations. The video I'm about to show shows 2 lambs castrated with a rubber ring at under a week of age. The one on the left that you'll see received local anaesthetic treatment immediately after the ring was applied, and the one on the right didn't and is experiencing acute pain. The indicators, as you can probably appreciate, are the inability to rest, the tail wagging, extending the hind limbs, collapsing to the ground, getting up again, a rapid respiratory rate. That pain typically lasts for 2 hours, then is followed by further inflammation and pain, which can persist for more than 2 days. And studies have also demonstrated that ewes are more attentive to their lambs when they're experiencing pain, and measurably more so than when their lambs have simply experienced stress, such as social isolation. What does the veterinary profession think about the fact that several million young animals are castrated without pain relief each year in Europe, and many more are tail docked? BVA's policy position, with the UK's Sheep Veterinary Society, published in 2019, presses for a 3 Rs approach to castration and tail docking, replacing the need to perform these procedures through alternative management practices, reducing the numbers of animals to the minimum necessary, and refining the procedures through lobbying government and industry to develop and authorise a local anaesthetic and analgesic protocol for use in field conditions. And that position followed BVA's 2017 policy position with the British Cattle Veterinary Association, which also advocated a 3 Rs approach to castration and disbudding of calves, and emphasised the importance of using both a local anaesthetic and a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug to manage pain once the local anaesthetic has worn off. In a third example, FVE, with the European Association of Porcine Health Management, also in 2019, published their policy position calling for a move away from painful mutilations such as tail docking in pigs. And in each case, we've seen examples of these policy positions fulfilling their agenda-setting purpose. These are industry headlines. Urgent action needed on pain relief for calf husbandry tasks. Vets call for pain relief. And this from the Responsible Use of Medicines in Agriculture Alliance. Give routine pain relief to calves, may lower antibiotic use too, as pain affects appetite and immunity. In recent years, BVA and FEE have both published comprehensive and visionary positions on sustainable animal agriculture, in which, amongst many other recommendations, they present the imperative for an evolved agricultural system that doesn't depend on routine use of mutilations, offers stimulating living environments to allow for the performance of highly motivated behaviours, and sees animals bred in an ethically responsible way, slower growing broilers, for example, to improve health and welfare. The veterinary profession is sometimes asked what it thinks about intensive or factory farming, These terms can be divisive, but if we look beyond the terms, you can see we are united with all those who are working towards a good life for Europe's animals in our pushing for positive change. In 2021, the FVE General Assembly adopted the Federation's positions on moving towards more animal welfare-friendly systems for laying hens and farrowing systems, away from cages and crates. And the European Commission has, as we know, announced its commitment to ending the use of crates and cages in European agriculture by 2027, with critically, support for the farming sector and protection from imports. And the veterinary profession will continue supporting with that transition to maximise benefits and mitigate risks. Economics are often and understandably cited as a blocker to progress. But we should all continue working together to reframe how social goods like safe, nutritious, affordable, sustainable food are recognised and valued. BVA has done excellent work in the UK in successfully lobbying the government to recognise animal welfare as a public good, deserving of public money. The government-led Animal Health and Welfare pathway in England has farrowing crates, cages, pain management, and slower-growing chickens, all in scope, together with funded yearly vet visits. And similarly, FVE has done excellent work to highlight the value of regular animal health visits to farmers, consumers, and society required under the European Union Animal Health Law, and is also emphasising the value of veterinary animal welfare visits in combination with animal health visits. While none of us should be afraid to press the moral imperative for good health and welfare for farmed and other animals, we can also confidently cite the financial benefits. These include reduced mortality, improved product quality, improved resistance to disease, a lower risk of zoonoses and animal-borne infections, higher returns from motivated consumers when welfare can be linked to trusted food assurance schemes and appropriate transparent labelling. And importantly, producer pride and satisfaction, which supports farmer well-being and can contribute to recruitment and retention within the agricultural sector. And the delivery of these benefits relies on a continuing and ever-developing stream of animal health products and services: vaccines, parasiticides, analgesics, antibiotics, and other medicines, and diagnostic tools and technologies, including those capable of detecting preclinical disease. We should be honest that not all animal welfare improvements automatically result in financial gain, and some, such as reduced stocking density, initially incur costs. But when informed, concerned citizens have signalled their ethical tolerance and boundaries, then evolution must happen, and new systems and practices, underpinned by political and legislative support, can begin to realise these financial benefits. Where conflicts occur between providing for both physical health and mental well-being, novel approaches and practices can create solutions. For example, while it's long been believed, based on available evidence, that mortality rates are higher for hens not housed in cages, a large-scale 2021 study found that mortality in indoor, cage-free housing systems decreases over time until there are no differences between caged and non-caged systems. And using data from 16 countries, 6,040 commercial flocks, and 176 million hens, the study demonstrated the benefits of farm managers gaining experience and knowledge of non-cage systems over time, coupled with switching to breeds that are better suited to non-cage housing. Providing a veterinary voice for Europe's sentient animals can be challenging because it conveys a need for change. But the science and implications of sentience are gathering apace, And as an evidence and ethics-led profession, we have to respond and act on that. Animal sentience can't be our inconvenient truth. In responding, I also strongly believe that the veterinary profession is assisting animal-using industries of many kinds, farm, companion, sports, to prepare and adapt to society's shifting attitudes and demands for the humane treatment of animals. Accepting this rationale, we'll all play our part in ensuring the use of animals for human benefit is ethically sustainable. As the BVA and FVE strategies acknowledge, animal welfare sits amongst a number of pressing global issues, including climate change, biodiversity loss, and antimicrobial resistance. And where animal welfare fits in the classic three-pillar conception of sustainability, environment, economics, and social, is not clear. Improving animal welfare should be considered a hallmark of social progress. But to better capture this, veterinary policy positions have supported the 3 E's of sustainability: environment, economics, and ethics. Balancing these sustainability objectives in animal agriculture points to different possible food futures. 4 simplistic but insightful descriptions of potential future scenarios are described by author Rob Percival as follows. We need more food. In this narrative, we accept that there is escalating global demand. We need more for less. Efficiency is key. Techno-flesh to the rescue. There is escalating global demand, but precision fermentation and cellular agriculture will provide the answer. Agroecology is the answer. We need to reconfigure societal relationships and our relationship with the natural world. We'll need to eat differently, but livestock are integral to the agroecological solution. Justice for animals. Meat is environmentally damaging, cruel, and unnecessary. A plant-based diet frees land for biodiversity. A just resolution to the climate crisis involves justice for farmed animals. Many of us will be sympathetic to different elements of these narratives, but they reveal why different actors in the food systems debate can sometimes talk past one another. Against this backdrop, FVE says that production systems aiming for large amounts of relatively low-priced meat generally don't contribute to sustainability, nor to healthy eating habits, while BVA advocates the less and better approach to meat and dairy consumption. Both organisations caution that pushing farmed animals ever harder for efficiency and productivity will be incompatible with our vision for a good life for those animals. And so we step back out into nature to ringneck parakeets outside the European Parliament and to the Romanian Danube Delta, where I'm yet to visit. To conclude, the veterinary profession is focused on providing a good life for animals under human stewardship, with an emphasis on mental well-being and the performance of species-typical behaviour, underpinned by excellent physical health. We are advocating animal agriculture, which is both environmentally and ethically sustainable, in which animals experience a good life and humane death, supported by excellent stock personship, expert and regular veterinary care, first-class animal health services, and continued clear policy support for a fair transition, including protection from lower welfare imports. As a veterinarian, I believe that meeting these objectives will contribute to a world-leading food system in Europe, and of which European citizens and producers can be proud. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sean. Thank you. And Sean will have some copies of his book available for sale over coffee break. So if you'd like to, discuss things a little further with him and learn more about the book and grab a copy, it's there. As we mentioned earlier, the European Commission is in the process of revising the European legislation in terms of animal welfare. And there's, of course, a lot of discussion about this revision. So we will hear from our next speaker how this ongoing process is taking place and what lies ahead. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andrea Gavinelli, who's head of unit at DG Sante. He's also a vet by training, so we're continuing on the same flow. Andrea, good morning.
I will take up from there. Let's see. Allora, let's say how it's going. Now, there are some slides. In fact, good morning to everyone. Pleasure. Good morning to the many I know, many colleagues. Well, in fact, thank you, Shen, for your very good address. And in fact, I mean, through the eyes of a vet, when I was walking around the corridor of DG Agri 20 and more years ago, feelings and perception about talking about animal welfare at that time, revising legislation, and today is a good opportunity to reflect on this with you, because in fact the dynamic of when I was there, through the eyes of a vet, we were negotiating the laying hens directive and introducing the phase out of the conventional cages. It happened in 98 and 99. And the dynamic of economics, what we call the vet eyes, in DG Agri at that moment, we're starting to cope with also societal feelings about a question that is really a question on the table of today, and we saw in your presentation. Is the life of an animal something like being there and farm and growth waiting to be killed, or there are elements in their life that is worthwhile to discuss together? As a vet, we know, you show the pain of these cows, of these lambs, and it's a dimension that means a lot today when, through the eyes of the Green Deal, we started to, let's say how it works, yes, we started to look into why we have animal welfare here, in which context we should be revising it, and in which way we can really achieve this transition. How to do this also is the big question we have today. So the dynamic is on the table of everyday discussion in Brussels, and I have to say it's an important role we're playing for the whole Europe, but not only. What we have on the table is an increased public awareness comparing with this famous day of the 90s. Awareness of what is an animal functioning. I still remember myself discussing with the colleagues about sentience, about the fact that fish were feeling pain or not. At that time, there was not clear this dimension, so that's why today we have an acquis of legislation which fish are excluded from some of the scope of the current rules. The expectation towards the public authority was totally different. And we had a national engagement in the EU that was different from today. Also, the EU was smaller than today. As a consequence, there were different cultures and different approach, different dynamics. And then another important element is that we have a sense of responsibility that is growing up in the European Union corridors, in the institutions, here. A sense of responsibility that is shown by many of our way of walking and talking about animals and what we produce with animals. There is and we have a transformation that is clearly a transformation that is not coping with the freezing of standards that we have in the EU legislation that sometimes is older than 25 years ago. Not only because of technology, that's the reason of my speech today. It's not only the technology that imposes a change. is the fact that these standards, despite we had so much advancements in science and technology, we have professors on animal welfare sitting around, they will be in the panel, but is this sense of responsibility that is bringing this new dimension in this moment I'm living through as responsible for animal welfare for the unit. But I mean, it's an immense world that is rotating around. There is a political context that is comparing to, I repeat, my feeling of 30 years ago is really different. We had a public consultation recently, and citizens intervening on the web freely. They highlighted that practically our legislation is not fitting for the purposes of and the aspiration they have. So practically, there are tensions about this, tension that we register every day. You saw exactly the debate about the Green Deal, even in the European Parliament, and the attitude versus who is paying the price of this transformation, who is discussing this is not only the political level, is discussed at every level, the level of officials in the Commission, is discussed in the street, is in the newspaper. To be clear, the sustainability of the system is, of course, at the center of this discussion. We saw a landscape where farmers are less and less, and I'm happy to be in the panel with Thomas later because he's really a farmer. And second, we have a discussion about the quality of food of every day, not in terms of food safety. That is an element that is today an element of everyday life given nearly for granted in the EU by the EU citizens. But in fact, we have a new dimension here. That is the dimension of food security. A dimension new between brackets, not new, because we know that in Europe, in the long history of Europe, we have been fighting and struggling for food security, and we have historians that can talk to about it. But in fact, we have a scenario that is coping with probably the strongest and the hardest fight comparing with the different wars we have been through. That is the fight to preserve environment and climate and to cope with this challenge of every day. Honestly, welfare, why is there and what could bring to us? Well, in this new dimension, it's clear that animal welfare has proven to become a component and an important promoter of an healthy life for an animal. This is, in any case, proven also because it's bringing, for example, a clear reduction in the use of antimicrobials, and a concept that is important not only for the animals, but exactly for the situation of the public health, where we call the silent tsunami, the silent storm, this antimicrobial situation and what is going on for the human being. It's clear that maintaining biodiversity, and when we're talking about that, we talk about also breeds, is also a task that is bringing a different dimension in life, not only for the advantages for the health of the animal and the quality, but it's also an advantage in terms of the way we are reappropriating a concept of animal that is a concept of a sentient being where we interrelate. We are all aware that there is a relation between the human and the animal, and there is a relation between the farmer and the animal. But in fact, what would be nice to talk is that it's important to regain this dimension of quality of life, and quality of life means good health, good welfare, and happiness. That's why I would like to say animal health and animal welfare, different roles, same goal. Good title, I like it, thank you, Roxanne. But in fact, I would say that this goal for me, I would like to say positive, could be I'm Italian, but it could be a lot of happiness for everyone. That is the best wish I would like in reforming welfare, because in fact, a life worth living is really a dimension for welfare that is very important, but is a dimension for a medical doctor, is a dimension for a psychologist, a dimension for an ethologist, is a dimension for everyone. I know that talking about this in the corridor of Brussels could seem a little bit illusionary, and I'm known to be like that, but in fact, it's a moment to put the center something like that. Something, yes, a little bit more shiny. So, aligning legislation with latest science and advancement in technology, I tell you, it's simple, in my opinion, comparing with what I just said, cioè comparing with the idea of grabbing a positive way of living. That is exactly what is sometimes in this debate is a little bit lost of sight. Healthier animals, for example, with great instruments for granting living conditions that are appropriate, medicines and vaccines, is exactly an important element that comes into the spectrum. We start to talk about vaccination for also preventing or eradicate certain diseases that are zoonotic diseases and extremely risky for the human being. So today we have the capacity to invest in this, and we have also, I think, a new debate ongoing on the table about that. And it's connected also with this food security dimension. What is also interesting is that this intention to create a better environment and a better linkage in the human-animal dimension for the European Union is even able to go over a certain lecture of the legal boundaries of the competencies of Brussels here and there. And when I mention this, I mention, in fact, the issue of the welfare of cats and dogs, an issue that was never really developed in the regulations of Brussels, an area that has been left to subsidiarity for a long time, brought to the member state responsibility, but where there is, and we recorded, a strong call by the European citizens to really invest in really better standard for the breeding of cats and dogs, more guarantees of what is in fact the way and the quality of life of these animals, and preserve also this human-animal relation in a better mood. So this is why we come into this now, and we come into this with a very innovative approach that was never so before. That is, in fact, not just what we have on animal health, but a combination of the two. And again, we talk about this scope, an happier life for both. For a small family with a new puppy, with the way you can buy it safely on the web, the way you can trade it in a certain way, the way it can be bred with certain guarantees that are not there today in Europe. Now, when we talk about who is responsible for this, but in fact, it's interesting to say that the moral element of this is coming more and more predominant in this discussion. And there is a political change ongoing that is even going before the market change. I am always joking with the people on my team because I should print out a T-shirt with a sentence and the thing that I've been always people telling me when I meet. Because preparing a revision of the legislation is first of all meeting the people, the stakeholders, the people that are in the business, like today. And I'm doing it since 2 years every day, collecting information like I'm doing and reasoning. One element I got frequently is saying, yes, people are saying that they love animal welfare, nobody can shoot against it, but when they go to the supermarket, if you look into the trolley, they don't buy anything about. They look for the price. This is a T-shirt I can print. Because I heard it probably, well, it's exponential, the number of times I heard it. To be clear, the fact that you can afford and respect and I feel this in the people talking about this, your moral aspirations in the everyday life is the best thing, but you need compromise every day. Sometimes you aim for your children the best school you can afford, but you can aim even more as a moral aspiration also, but you cannot. So that's why it's very difficult today to measure these in terms of this dimension and the relation between moral and market. But it's true one thing, that we have instruments, if we plan a proper revision, to create the capacity for everyone is aspiring to this, to get into this, and to preserve this properly. And this is really a way to look into, for example, the next common agricultural policy, not this one of today, but the one of the future, that will have to deal with this moral dimension. A moral dimension that, I repeat, through the corridor of DG Agri 20 more years ago, was not in every tile as it is today. So, I was introducing something about a reform. Talking about a reform that, as I say here, we have engaged with the proposing for different piece of legislation on keeping animals, transporting and killing them, and also a possible animal welfare label. It's a trip, a journey in which we are busy today. We have not yet concluded it. We are doing an important assessment of the science, the economics, and the social elements of it. And there are clear motivation of it, but we need to make it, and it's not an easy task, as you know. We have a very important timeline that is, in fact, a timeline in which we have to cope even with the end of a mandate of the current Commission and election in the next year for the European Parliament. So altogether makes it very, very tight. So it's a moment in which the knowledge is there, the convergence of several elements in the civil society and not only are there. There are driving force, but we have a very sophisticated process to cope with. As a consequence, the big thing here is that, in my opinion, everyone here, as you saw in the previous slide, has a role to play in this reform, with or without Commission proposals. It's really a role in which this moral dimension of Europe, this ethical aspect, this need of transform science in an everyday sense of happiness is there and will be there, with or without any intervention from an administrative point of view. And this is a big, big responsibility for every one of us here, because we are the actor in the sector since many, many years. We have enough knowledge, I said, and we have the possibility to step up. But as I said, it's not said by the way we can do it through an administrative or non-administrative way of doing it. European citizens express many times the willingness to go for more legislative approach, more standards, to also harmonize the internal market, as we call it. But in fact, is a very sophisticated process, especially when we talk about ethical boundaries that are different in many member states. So we must be aware of all of this, and we need to adapt. So to conclude, I think that the title of this event, Animal Health and Animal Welfare, Different Roles, Same Goal, is a good one. I think is really showing that there is a transformation in the way we look into this. There is no contraposition, but a real way to look into a better future and to invest our knowledge in that direction in a common and synergic way. Thank you very much.
Will you take a couple of questions?
Okay.
So we have a little bit of time before our coffee break, and Andrea is happy to take a few questions. So here's your chance. I know it's always a bit difficult to start, but somebody has to. I'm sure out of all he's said, you know, you're curious to know a little more about the process. Yes, sir. There's a mic coming your way.
Yes, ciao Andrea. My name is Luca and I work for MSD Animal Health. My question is quite simple. Timeline for the publication of the legislation.
Thank you. Very simple question, very simple answer. The publication, the adoption is scheduled for the last part of September, so the last part of this year. We are in the schedule for the moment, but in fact is still a lot to say and a lot to do. That's what is in the pipeline as the schedule.
So a busy summer ahead.
Yeah, indeed, yes. Not different from today, anyway.
Any more clarification, Beate?
Thank you very much. My name is Beate Steenberg, and I'm the Secretary General of AVEC, the European Poultry Meat Association. I'm sure that you know what I'm going to ask you. But when we are raising the standards in Europe to a higher level, the food will be more costly. And are you sure that we are able to impose the same demands on the things we import? Because otherwise we will just export the animal welfare trouble to third countries. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Birte. Well, of course, I don't want to deprive anyone of the coffee. That is an animal welfare, but also human welfare issue. But to keep it short, Birte, thank you for the question. First of all, as you know, and I center my key speech about moral grounds. And this dimension is the real dimension in which EU, since always, is able to stand strongly. Not only for animals kept for food. We have, for example, the one kept for fur, or the one kept for, like the seals that were killed for their products. As you know, we went through this with third countries and the fact that we banned, for example, the import of seal products in the past, winning a discussion on the ethical and moral grounds of this dimension in Geneva. It's clear-cut that we have an element now that is coming up strongly, and this moral responsibility, and is a question that is imposing a bigger reflection about what will be our relation with the imports from third country. The costs is different, because the issue of imports and the equilibrium on trade, and so the competitiveness or not of this market. This could bring back only our discussion to the origin and not reflecting the reality of today. So it would be very, very old-fashioned to think about competitiveness in this way. The dimension of competitiveness, when you read some elements in some now economic essay, is also picking up about the quality of life, and we'll come back to the title of this event, and the capacity to reflect in your needs of a nation. I call the EU a nation. Reflects really in your needs, in what you provide to your citizens, what they morally look for. And that's really important. We have received 7 or more European Citizens Initiative in the last 2 years and a half in the European Union. Of these 7, 4 were about animals. And they demand, I know people in this room, they were busy with it. And they know how much it is, therefore, to get this citizen initiative through. So it means a lot. It is a lot of messages that are coming up. And are not only messages for Brussels, it's a message for all the trading partners we have around. Good ears can listen to it, because there are also good market opportunities. That's really interesting. And that's, for me, a very important discussion to be on. I saw some colleagues from Argentina that I know very well around here, where we started to discuss animal welfare a long time ago, in a very constructive manner. I think this constructive approach, because, as I said, there is a convergence globally on this moral need for happiness. And I think we can play with it in a current constructive manner. That's my aspiration, at least.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Quick question, Roxanne, before we break for coffee?
Yeah, if I'm the only thing between you and coffee, I'll be very quick. Andrea, thank you for your intervention. I was just a little surprised, and I'm not sure I agree, so please convince me, when your first conclusion was animal welfare. Let me read you and quote you correctly.
Yeah, no problem.
I thought I had the picture with me. Just a second. There I am. Animal welfare cannot be reconciled with sustainability, but actively contribute to it. I would tend to disagree, because, I mean, if we take sustainability not with the 3 E's, sorry, but with the usual economic, environment, and social, this is such a balanced approach to sustainability, and I don't see why, amongst all the criteria, animal welfare cannot fit into that model.
I know the coffee is getting very hard. you know, Roxana, I like to provoke.
So do I.
It's very important, this, because to stimulate this moment is an important decision-making moment for everyone at every level, in the Commission and not only. I mean, sometimes our sense of responsibility and our way of being, recognizing living beings, could be unsustainable from the economic point of view in particular, because we give priority to this dimension instead of the other. So reconcile this is not, for me, 100% safe. Sometimes we have to make a derogation, like we like in the Commission, for one side or the other. It's difficult to explain in 2 words. I put it in that sentence just because I know that my role here was to provoke discussion, not to stop here. But you know what I mean when I say sometimes looking for the good, the absolute good is impossible, but it's a tendency that you have inside, bear a cost. And you need to understand if you can compromise on it or not. That's why when we have a big challenge like end the cage age was mentioned, and we know, challenges that are really important because there is a dimension there that is symbolic. We need to really look into the sustainability of this decision, but we cannot renounce to this idea per se, if it's not sustainable. That's to be discussed.
And discuss we can do more after coffee break, because Andrea will be part of our first panel. So there will be time for more questions and discussion with the other panelists. So thanks again, Andrea. And we now break for coffee until 10:45. So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And we're going to go head on with our first panel this morning. And it's a pleasure to welcome back Andrea Gavinelli. So we will be able to continue the discussion with him. Next to Andrea is Thomas Duffy. He's the Vice President of the European Council of Young Farmers. And I should have started with the ladies, but after all, equality goes both ways. So next to Thomas, we have Mette Udal, who's the Vice President of the Federation of Veterinarians of Europe. And next to her is Joe Swabe, who's Senior Director of Public Affairs for the Humane Society International /Europe. Welcome to you all, and it's a pleasure to have you with us. So we've been hearing a lot about the link between animal welfare and animal health, and it seems that, I mean, as we've been hearing and as we've been saying since the beginning of this discussion, the two are so interlinked that it's impossible to dissociate them. But are they or is it a prop, or is it a prerequisite? And you all have a role in ensuring high standards of animal welfare in Europe in your own capacity. So I'd like to ask each of you how you see that role. You, Andrea, maybe I'll give you the floor first. As a policy maker, how do you see that role?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, indeed, it's easy for us. We have been working on standards for EU legislative instruments like directives or regulation since more than 30 years. So the role is clear-cut based on the fact that there is a clear demand by the European citizens to keep this standard at the pace of the scientific and technological evolution, so to respond to this, but also to grant this level of protection for the welfare of animals at the European, in the European scenario, at the pace also of the, as I said, the moral grounds for it. So practically, it's a simple answer for me. My role is really to administer this process and to look forward to have it as much democratic as possible.
Mette, as a vet, how do you see that role?
So the vet role is, I think, threefold. It's about providing with being engaged in research, providing evidence-based markers of how to improve animal welfare, for example, and animal health. It's also about implementing what we know in practice, educating owners, educating farmers. And then the third part is to be what I've heard Sean call the critical friend, or the counselor who also dares to challenge if something needs to be improved.
And you fit in all three parts and fill the three roles. Joe, you represent an animal welfare group, so how do you fit in that picture, in that role?
Well, I think that animal protection NGOs in general have an important role to play in the pursuit of high welfare standards. You can see us essentially as the voice of the voiceless. And we're also some of the few stakeholders that don't have a direct economic or commercial interest in animal agriculture, and the discussion is going to be on farm animals, as I've understood. We've also got a lot of people working for us with expertise in animal welfare science, as well as those like me who are basically political animals who have a good understanding of how policy and politics, and certainly in the EU, how the policy arena work. We're there to advocate on behalf of animals, and we're trying to make sure that those who are responsible for regulating how animal agriculture is run, and also those who are keeping animals for food, are actually paying full regard to their animal welfare needs. And we also can't forget that NGOs such as, not exclusively the HSI, but all of the animal protection organizations, we represent the positions of literally millions of concerned citizens who, they want to see significant change in how we treat and care for farm animals. And they're counting on us, essentially, to make sure that their views are articulated, since they're not necessarily able to speak out for animals themselves. Thank you.
Thomas, you deal with animals physically every day, like vets, but not in the same role. So how do you see your role as a farmer?
I mean, the essential role of farmers in terms of animal welfare is prevention and early intervention. So we don't treat animals when they become ill, and very often the product of poor animal welfare is beyond our ability to resolve in terms of elevated levels of stress leading inevitably to disease. We don't administer or prescribe drugs. However, farmers are there to understand their animals and ultimately to reduce stress. And there is a economic, but also there is I don't like to say ethical or moral, but because it gets a bit tricky when you get into those areas. But I have never met a farmer who enjoys their animals suffering in any way. It's simply not something that we enjoy doing. But often because of a lack of education or a lack of understanding, or indeed a lack of physical or economic ability to address these issues is the challenge. And certainly as a young farmer, we see this as a very critical issue because while young farmers across Europe are have access to better education. I don't say better educated, because on-farm learning is perfectly equal to any other learning, but we have had access to third-level education and second-level education that a previous generation simply hadn't. And so we have had the opportunity to study agriculture as a business model, but also in terms of understanding our animals better, understanding behaviours. I mean, my father, no one ever would have taught him about a point of balance on a dairy cow, but he still worked with dairy cows his entire life. So his experience is valuable, but you're implementing new experiences around flight zones, reducing stress and shed design. So all of those things are very, very critical. There is also a role and consistently farmers across the EU are one of the most, if not the most, trusted professions in terms of educating the consumer as to what we are doing. And some farmers are not great communicators, and some farmers would prefer not to have this. But I heard a great line a few years back, actually, by the head of the WFO, who said it's no longer a choice to put up fences around our farms and keep the public out. The public want to know, and it is our obligation to educate them in such a way that they know what we're doing and why we are doing it.
Thank you. I'll invite you, I mean, we're going to continue exchanging questions and answers, but I'll invite you also to, signal if you'd like to answer to something has just been said, or push one of the questions a bit further and intervene and talk to one another directly. Very happy to take that into our conversation. Andrea, I'd like to come back to the upcoming legislative proposal. I mean, you did say that definitely you were considering the animal welfare part was fully integrated in the plans that you have, although I understand you're still consulting. But how or to what extent is the new proposal going to promote animal welfare?
Yes. Well, thank you. I think if you want to debate something, this is the real good question, because indeed is a trick. And the reason I'm sitting here and the reason of this title of today, the trick is in terms of a EU legislative system to find the way to connect these two, we can say, pillars of the veterinary legislation of the EU. Actually are three, because we have also the public health dimension. It's interesting because when I was coordinating also the approach to antimicrobial resistant policy for the entire DG, I did it a few years ago, I was really surprised at the very beginning how the connection in this concept of One Health, when you talk about, for example, the fact that you increase space allowance to farm with animals like pigs, and the density reducing it is having a clear a positive effect on their health for the respiratory system. So consequently, you reduce the use of medicaments because, of course, better health, less medicaments. But in fact, this is having an incredible linkage with the quality of human health, because in fact it reduces the impact on the antimicrobial resistance for the human being. But at the same time, there is the environmental component that is also missing in the discussion of a little bit of today, but it's not easy to put everything on this stage. In conclusion, this experience showed me that, and it was just before starting this task of revising the current animal welfare legislation, show me how I believe we have in each of these pillars an important knowledge that there are linkage. The problem is to catalyze the effect between the three pillars. Health, public health, animal health and animal welfare, to catalyze the change in a smart manner. And the fact that we are going to revise the legislation, propose the revision of this legislation, is an incredible good opportunity, because because what happened when we propose legislation is not a decision taken. On the contrary, it's a debate that starts in the Council and with the co-legislator, and for the first time historically in the European Union with the European Parliament, because it was never involved in a co-decision procedure. historically, for who is in the business, means that the debate will be a lot larger, and also everyone will have a lot to say during this. So this will be the real moment to, today is a starting point, in my opinion. Not the starting point of our preparation, of course, luckily, but the starting point of a debate of the next year that should consolidate for the next 10 years or 20 years, a target between, and these catalyzers, this instrument. So I don't have an answer now because the answer must be built.
It's in the process of being built. Mette, I mean, to pick up on some of the things that Andrea was saying, we're really trying our best to ensure a biosecure and pathogen-free environment and facilities. But by doing so, isn't there a risk that unintentionally we're actually ignoring the welfare needs of animals?
So certainly handling pathogens is key to securing health of production animals. The interesting thing is that we've been focusing with the building of intense production system. There's been an increased load of animals per square meter. There's been more animals per farm. And to deal with the inbuilt disease outbreak risks in that, we've had which has been a logical focus on handling pathogens and trying, simply to avoid them. Like humans, they like perfect solutions, so if we remove a problem, it's not there any longer. But as we all know, that's not how nature is built. It just poses other problems, because if we remove pathogens, we also increase the risk of animals being less resilient because they have an immune system like we have. So it's not as simple as that. Is it connected to welfare? Yes, it is, because intensive production system where we try to remove all triggers of disease can lower welfare if it also means removing bedding, putting more animals per square meter. So there is a balance in this. And I think what we know now is that we had great success following this road of intensive production system for a while. But now we also realize that there's more to the balance than that, and we need to take another direction. That doesn't mean we have less focus on animal health, because that is linked to welfare, but it means that we can do more than just have one focus.
Thank you. Thomas, my question to you is pretty similar. It's actually the same question as to Mette. Do you think, in your experience, that we're unintentionally we're just overlooking certain welfare needs by trying to secure this specific environment and facilities?
I think we certainly were. I mean, you see the design of particularly housed swine, less so chickens now, but in terms of the lack of enrichment in their environment. And in many ways, unfortunately, they're very intelligent creatures. And so they need a lot of enrichment. Now and I suppose we have seen a shift over the last 40 years from outdoor systems, extensive systems, particularly in pigs and poultry, into more indoor and housed systems. And the issue is that particularly those animals are more prone to disease, and disease spreads quite quickly, etc. So the balance in trying to get that right is a very difficult question. There are some interventions in existing infrastructure that we can do to improve enrichment, but the reality is, in most cases, and we look at, say, a very good example would be in terms of trying to reduce pig mortality, piglet mortality. Yes, we could whip out the cages in the morning and we'll have a lot of dead pigs. That's the long and the short of it. So instead, we need to redesign, rebuild infrastructure. And there are mainly two groups of farmers who are in particular I would say, have difficulty with this. The first group will be farmers towards the end of their career. Why would they invest in new housing, and why would they, when they're going to just be there for 10, 15 years and they intend to retire or step out of the sector? So that's very much a challenge. And then the other group is actually young farmers, because while we have this balancing factor of young farmers are more engaged, more worried, and more aware of consumer expectations around animal welfare, we are also less financially secure. Every single European Commission assessment has shown that access to credit is lower amongst young farmers. Investment in infrastructure requires credit. Therefore, there is this challenge. If I am a young farmer taking over a pig or poultry unit, and I'm going to have to modernise, I'm going to have to modernise the water, the feeding, everything else like this, and now on top of that you're telling me I'm going to have to modernise for animal welfare, this becomes a very large challenge. And so we need to have specific support as part of that for young farmers. But I would also argue, and I would argue very strongly, occasionally young farmers are put into that socio category of sustainability. I would actually argue we shouldn't be in there as much, because you change the facilities of a farmer who's in his 30s, he's intending to farm for 20 years, 30 years. You change the facilities of a farmer who's in his 60s, he's only going to farm for 5 years. So there's a whole debate around how we do that and how we emphasise that.
Thank you. Joe, Thomas mentioned the various farming systems that we have, be they indoor, outdoor, intensive, extensive. What kind of impact do those various systems have on animal welfare?
Well, all farming systems have an impact on animal welfare. The main question is whether it's going to be a positive impact or a negative impact. And, you know, as an animal protection organization, we're most concerned about the production systems that fundamentally fail to meet the welfare needs of farmed animals. And this is why, you know, in the cage age direction that we've been moving in, is the priority is to eliminate cage confinement for farm animals. This is a practice that should be relegated to the annals of history. The science is clear. Behavioral needs of animals, like laying hens, can't be met in the confines of a cage. The birds need to scratch, they need to peck, they need to exhibit their natural foraging behavior, they need to be able to perch high, they need to be able to roost at night, they need to be able to select their nesting sites in order to, nice quiet places that they can lay their eggs. Likewise, broiler chickens causes a huge array of serious animal welfare problems. Crowded, barren living conditions, physical and metabolic problems associated with rapid growth, including a difficulty in walking. So my message here is that we essentially need to move away from all production systems that fail to respect and meet the animal welfare needs of the species we're keeping for food. In fact, animals, when we're thinking about how to redesign farming systems, the animals and its welfare must stand central to the design of any production system. And right now, in many cases, the opposite is true, because they're like units of production. Animals are forced to fit in to industrial systems, certainly when we're talking about pigs and poultry. But, let's be clear about this, though. No system is going to be 100% perfect. Some systems have higher welfare potential than others. I mean, outdoor access, that's really a big plus when it comes to the design of any system, but it's not always possible. And it also has to be well managed to reap any benefits. So at the very least, give animals natural light. Or, if animals are kept permanently indoors, let's make some facility that they can actually have light. For poultry, it could be a semi-enclosed veranda porch that's being designed for them. So, we're well aware of all of the downsides of outdoor and extensive production systems. I mean, they do far better meet the behavioral and welfare needs of animals, but, animals are exposed more to the elements and have a greater vulnerability to avian predators or disease vectors. So, we just make sure that the systems are well designed to give animals, especially birds, places to shelter from rain and heat, to give cover from aerial predators. And, it's also true that animals that experience higher animal welfare conditions will also tend to be physically more robust. And lastly, good husbandry, good stock personship is vital on any farm, whatever the size. You can have huge farms with well-trained people looking after animals that may experience better welfare than on a small farm. Small isn't necessarily better. It really does depend on how animals are being routinely handled, how their living environments are enriched, and how farm workers understand the animal welfare needs. Large farms also often have more resources to make the animal welfare improvements needed. So it's going to also be important that training and responsibility for animal welfare should be an integral part of the animal welfare legislative revision as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience at this stage? Yes, please. Yeah, the mic's coming. The lady there with the blue top.
Thanks. Good morning. My name is Dawn Howard, and I'm the Chief Executive of the UK Animal Health Association, NOAA. And I have a question initially to Andrea. Thank you very much for your presentation, really enjoyed it. In your concluding comments, you talked about the contribution of animal welfare to sustainability. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit more about what tools we have to measure improved welfare and how that links into improved sustainability, to enable us to have an evidence base for our citizens and for stakeholders. Thank you.
Andrea.
Okay. Thank you for a very, very, very good question. This is at the center of the reform. I think it's one of the targets of the reform that we have to really achieve together. We are consulting and developing a more. In fact, the combination of health and welfare in terms of indicators is an element I just mentioned, for example, when we talk about the reduction of the use of antibiotics in a farm, no? In the sense that certain welfare improvements are bringing towards, in fact, stronger animals, was just said, and at the same time, we have a capacity to monitor it with the reduction of our even expenses. In terms of sustainability, is also an economic sustainability, what we talk about. These elements are not present as an indicator today in the current legislation, and in fact there is a total absence of capacity for the EU to monitor the proper level of implementation. And I think from the side of the farming experience, many investment in technologies have been brought forward. The fact that certain flagship initiatives for welfare have been discussed but never developed, taking into account this advancement and the indicator on how you can perform better through different means, it does not allow us to monitor the sustainability also of this investment, because it's not giving us back the savings, for example. One example is when we talk about the castration of pigs. The fact of the castration of pigs and leaving the traditional one that is demonstrated also without anesthetic and so on to be painful and really no more even acceptable for certain part of the citizens today. And moving to the alternative, we have technologies available to avoid the physical castration. The indicator we have are about food conversion, efficiency, better management of the animal, of course, better welfare, and economics too. So this is the elements that we have to bring also in this picture to motivate the transition. And this helps us also. We have flagship initiative here that Jo knows because she speaks about building up of pigs with a tail. We saw it in the picture by Sean. Is like playing with the Lego. If we take only one piece and we don't know how to play, and it's just the tail on the pig, and we try to build without the other set of piece of Lego, doesn't work. We know better than everywhere that was in the directive long time ago this, but practically a lot not applied in the EU. Probably because we give this Lego in the end of the legislator, we give in the end of the enforcer, the veterinarian that has to go to inspect and audit. This Lego is in the end of the farmer. But at the end of the story, they don't fit together because we don't have all the elements that should be around to grow up a pig with a tail. That are space, enrichment was mentioned, of course, and many other elements that we know. This is an important set that we have to build up. To put it simple, we should put in the hands of everyone the right instruction to play with the box of Lego we have. And without instruction, it doesn't work. And it's true that when I buy Lego today, I'm lost, because if you don't have the instruction, you will never build it up together. It's too difficult.
Sean, you had a question.
Thank you. I just wondered if I could pick up on Thomas's nervousness to incorporate ethics and morals into your considerations. It's just by way of reflection, really. I mentioned a couple of times in my presentation about vets being science and ethics led, and that was deliberate because in our journey towards saying more about animal welfare and developing policy positions, there were vets amongst us who said, we've got to stick to the science. A bit like you, this shouldn't be about values and ethics and those sorts of things. We're a science-based profession and we should stick to the science. And we challenge that on the grounds that science tells us what is. It can demonstrate, prove that an animal experiences pain, but it doesn't then do the next bit to say what should be. A position statement doesn't simply describe the world, it describes what we feel ought to happen in light of that science. And so the science sits in the context of values, which is ethics and morals, and we've heard it several times today about the moral imperative. So I think, just by way of reflection, it was, your comment echoed the sorts of comments that we've heard in the veterinary profession, and I think we felt it was important to embrace the language and reality of ethics and morals and grow in confidence about talking about that, albeit very closely allied to the science. I wondered how you...
I'll make a very brief kind of intervention on that. On one side, I think it is a very tricky place, and particularly because I represent a European-wide organisation. The moral values or the whatever ethics you might say will vary between Ireland, Spain, Nordic countries, Eastern Europe. Huge variations between all. I would just pick Spain, Southern Europe, I should say. But equally, when you are communicating to people who are very practical and very pragmatic and frankly work 18-hour days and don't have time to look up, you will start talking about morals and ethics. Great, wonderful. They're not going to listen to you because they're not going to engage. This is the simple reality of that. But you can talk about the outcomes and you can talk about those other things. The other challenge that would be, and this is for the veterinary profession, for the farming community and for the general public, the general public's perception of what is a value in terms of animals' life, their well-being, would be different to mine. I often use this as an example. Most people of my generation may, their first experience of loss in terms of animal will be their pet or their goldfish. When I was about 4, I went to a St. Patrick's Day parade, and when I came back, it was my first experience of mortality because I found a crow eating a sick lamb that I was taking care of. So at 4, I was probably 5. At 5 years of age, I was watching an animal eat something that I'd taken care of. That's not an experience that an ordinary person has. And that is a pretty normal experience for farmers, not the eating things, but we all grow up learning that, your favorite sheep, your father didn't send it away to another farm, you're eating it. Your favorite cow, got lame and couldn't be recovered, so now it's McDonald's. And that's a very different life experience, and it gives a different set of values. Not necessarily totally different, but just the way we talk about it, we have to be very cautious. I've probably overrun a bit on a short intervention, but anyway.
Thank you. Meta, you wanted to intervene on that one.
Yeah, it's just because it's really interesting with the evidence part and the empiry and how to implement emotions in debates like this. What we've been talking about is that evidence is where we that is our markers from where to go. But actually, we have evidence-based knowledge that how many % of human decision is based on emotional, unconscious emotions, up to 80%. We know that evidence-based, which is why we need to take emotions into consideration as well, particularly when talking about social license, because this is all that built social license, and this is also a motivator for movement. While saying that, I do understand where you're coming from, because if you talk to practical persons being embedded in practicalities, it is a bit provoking, saying, but I feel that this is a problem. Then you need argumentation to do it. And this is why I think we should always be cautious about including both empirical evidence, but also emotions. And we tend to exclude emotions, which is peculiar because we are built from emotions.
I think that social license is the key area. Speaking to a farmer about, I feel this way, doesn't work. Saying the consumer will not accept this does work, because they can understand that.
Mm-hmm. Sean, you wanted to come back on that very quickly. If you don't mind, I'll take your next question in the next round, unless it's directly relevant to this. Yeah, no? Okay, thank you. Yeah, we'll have several rounds of questions, so don't worry. Sean, very briefly, please.
Yeah, sorry to be greedy. Just to reflect on the point about busy people struggling to engage with the fanciful world of ethics, I would just reflect that was also the argument amongst vets, that they're working all hours, God's send, and people who want to talk about ethics and welfare are in some sort of ivory tower. So we have, I think, overcome that. And then, as you say, because values are so variable, not least geographically, the challenge then, once we've engaged with ethics, is to try to build consensus and to reflect those different starting points and different worldviews into the eventual outcome. But thanks so much.
Thank you. To continue our discussion and come back to you all for more questions in a little while, Mette, we've talked about and I think it was Thomas who mentioned that the prevention aspect, and vets, of course, are involved in that, but there's a whole advisory function also to your job. And how do you advise farmers on protecting the health and the welfare of their animals in extensive systems where they have more contact, more interaction with wildlife, predators, and sometimes more difficult conditions? How do you advise them on that particular aspect?
Well, I guess we all appreciate this is a tricky question because, and it's tricky both with regards to biosecurity, but also with regards to the predator handling part. So basically, vets are there to take care of animals. And that is all animals, both domesticated and wild animals. And when production systems, when they go into nature, when part of the production side is fields, pastures, land, then we do mix domesticated and wild animals, and we need to find a balance. And how do we do that? It means sacrifices from both parts, because we can't have a situation where, for example, we say, hey, we'll just ban wilderness or biodiversity. That's not really how to do it, we know. So we need to find a balance, and that's where the vet comes in, because it is our job to look at research, to look at solutions, to go to producers and give input to plug-and-play solutions of how to do this. It will be very varied, because a predator problem is not the same in an Eastern European country, like in Austria, like in Nordic countries. So it's dependent on local situations. So this is where the vet needs individual assessments of individual animals and situations. And people. We work with people as well.
Yeah, the human dimension is absolutely essential. Thomas, is that how you, or not you necessarily, but farmers in general, cooperate with their vets in order to work on prevention and avoid, for instance, diseases carried by wild animals, or prevent them from adverse weather conditions, or?
Yeah, because I think adverse weather conditions are probably really underestimated in terms of the discussions we have had around this. I mean, it's wonderful to say we want every animal to have access to housing, and I appreciate Joe recognising that there are some cases where it is extremely difficult to achieve that for either economic reasons in terms of purchase of land, but also because of climatic reasons. It can be extremely challenging. I mean, we look at the spread of bird flu. In particular, I think Ireland is only just coming out of an enclosure lockdown. But I think to be fair, I think the consumer is recognition of that, those little stickers on the front of it, and they kind of understand it. I even saw it at a McDonald's recently, that there are times where we have to limit exposure to wildlife. But then the question is in terms of, say, the likes of predators. I think there's often a very large underestimation for the actual impact of predators. Again, if we look at the laying hen sector, I got a great example. We've had a massive recovery in my part of Ireland in the common buzzard. After decades of persecution, it's returning down, spreading down all the motorways. But I was talking to, we would have a lot of hen houses quite close by us, and I was talking to one of the operators of that. And I said, like, he said the buzzard is an issue. And I said, why is he taking a lot of your hens? He says, I don't care if he takes the hens. Like, it really doesn't. 1 or 2 dead hens is not going to be the end of the world. Those animals might have even been sick anyway. He's not worried about that. Problem is the stress. The stress reduces the grade of eggs for the next couple. And there are no easy solutions in this situation, because not only after predation, but they also will be afraid of any aerial, so they'll react to crows, which are a common species. And so you have to start having conversations about potential relocations from areas of concentration of poultry. That gets into very difficult, but if you don't have those conversations, farmers will take the 3S method, which is shoot, shovel and shut up, which is, and that's not something I'm endorsing by any manner of means, but it is an issue that if you don't engage with those processes and potentially relocate predators. On the larger scale, particularly I see this as an issue with wild boar, which are frankly entirely out of control across Europe. We are not handling that situation, but the risk in terms of the spread of disease, and I think there is a massive animal welfare question here, because it could be the end of extensive outdoor piggeries if we allow that to continue. There is very little anyone can do about the spread of avian disease, because birds fly and that's their nature and they will spread from one to the other. We don't want to see a situation where we reverse back to housing permanently. We may have times where you have to have spread it and protect the wild population. But we also need to limit, I should be clear here, we also need to limit for the welfare of the wild population as well in some cases. And we need to have very hard and fast rules. One of the more concerning to me thing, and I think it's good that there's maybe more recognition of pets, because some people will class what I call livestock as pets. Backdoor chickens are a major issue. While there's compliance with the lockdown orders in bird flu recently in Ireland, there were still people publishing pictures of their chickens out and around and interacting with wild birds. And while they may see this as a minor issue, I'm not an intensive producer, I'm not whatever, that's not a minor issue, that's a massive issue, particularly if those are rescued hens from former commercial units. Massive risk there that the national authorities seem unwilling to deal with in any way, shape or form. It's very concerning for producers.
Yeah, and COVID has probably increased that trend since everybody wanted to have their own hens, and indeed. Joe, in your opinion, who's best placed in this whole group of stakeholders that we've been talking about? Who's best placed to really provide advice on on-farm animals' welfare?
Well, I can imagine that you are probably expecting me to say vets, and I'm probably going to be lynched for saying no. But I actually believe that independent animal welfare scientists are in the best position to be able to at least provide the up-to-date insights about animal welfare. They're usually the most aware of, what the latest research is in terms of housing systems, in terms of nutrition, enrichment, etc. But, the reality of it is that the professionals that farmers are most likely to come into contact with in their everyday lives are indeed veterinarians. But we also can't forget that the relationships that large animal practitioners have with farmers are generally transactional in nature. I mean, this applies also to small animal practice as well, that people don't seem to appreciate, the public don't seem to appreciate that vets are effectively running businesses. They have to make a profit, they have to make choices, and they really don't want to be alienating their clients. And many years ago, when I used to be an academic and I spent a lot of time in research hanging around with vets, I really came to realize that there were so many different factors, also the position within the community, and even sometimes, religious belief, when you're in a small community, that you can have a risk of alienating the person that you need as actually your customer, and you need to get them to do the best thing for the animals that are being kept. That being said, I mean, it is crucial that vets are competent in animal welfare, and I know that things have changed a hell of a lot since I started working in the field about 30 years ago. But when I did start hanging out with vets professionally, I was shocked, to be honest, at how little emphasis there was on animal welfare in the veterinary curriculum. I know it's changed, and it certainly depends on where you are. I spent a few years working at University of Utrecht, which was probably one of the more advanced when it came to animal welfare at the time. But I think it's really important that the national veterinary associations, they need to ensure that animal welfare is also a compulsory part of the professional development training that members of the profession are required to take to update their skills and knowledge. It's not just all about the newest techniques. It's not about surgery. It's not all about disease prevention. Animal welfare is something that they really need to think about, because the vets that were receiving their training when they were my age, let's say, at the time when I was hanging out with them, if they didn't have the education then, so all those vets in their 50s, they also need the training that their younger colleagues may be receiving now, depending on where they're being educated. So that's essentially my plea, that if you want me to give the answer that vets should be in the position to give the best advice, it's up to the veterinary profession to ensure that those vets are trained to be able to do so.
Thank you. Meta. Yeah, I thought you might want to react to that.
Yeah. No, so I'm not actually going to oppose it, but I'm going to, giving a perspective on it, because I think it's important for all professions to declare potential biases and potential conflict of interest, definitely. So with that regard, I think it's also important when we talk about the veterinary profession to realize that now you're talking about vets in practice, and if you have, if your financial income is dependent upon a client, obviously you have a potential conflict of interest. But vets are so much more than that. I just wanted to add that, because the veterinary profession is diverse, and we work at all levels. So at some level we work as researchers, which are independent to industries, and then we also have a large group of vets in practice. So I agree for all professions we need education, we need to be transparent. That is very important when you work with transformations of an area.
Thank you. Andrea, so now that you've heard the points of view of our three other panelists, and we've been talking about prevention, and you mentioned checks a few times. So what role will vets play in the legislation with regard to animal welfare checks in farms?
Thank you. Well, a lot has been said, I think, because in fact, it's a question also where we can start with the knowledge we have in terms of the instrument that vets have in their learning process. I make just a reflection on what is the current state of the art of the EU legislation. No? If you look to the animal health law, we have, for example, an animal health veterinary visit that is mandatory, practically, provided by the legislative frame. When you look to the animal welfare set of legislation, there is no animal welfare requirement in terms of a visit by a vet. Practically, the situation showed the disparity in terms of the approach that is already seen by the legislation, but the legislation reflects what was the toolbox available for the discussion of these arguments at the European level. And this shows, in my opinion, how today, with the current legislative frame, we have limits to have really a vet doing something for animal welfare, because there are no provisions that are requiring a welfare visit or a welfare check by a vet. It's all about the responsibility of the owner of a transport company or who is signing a certain type of equipment and so on. In conclusion, is the moment, and this explains a lot why we're sitting in this room without window and not so much excitement, but with a good title on top, that no, I'm just joking, because I like this idea of all this happiness and positivity and the rest, and we have to adapt. And it's very important to say that we have vets, in my opinion, growing up knowledge, as has been said correctly, because schools started to teach, and there is also a sense of responsibility in the young vets that is coming about this linkage, and reading good books about that. But the problem is, in the frame of legislative requirement of today that is shaped like 30 years ago, what is prominent is that a vet have the duty to protect and prevent any disease, okay? For many reasons, economic, trade, whatever, zoonotics. But in fact, this type of duty for the welfare is fluid in the legislation. That's why sometimes vets are so busy with so many things to do that when they have to compile a vet report for welfare, except when it's demanded by a private company that is looking to a vet certification, come at the bottom of the pile. And despite they have knowledge, they regret to do it in 5 minutes. This is what I've been told, and has been told to our auditor many times visiting farms around the world. In Europe, it's really a little bit stepping up, but when you go outside Europe, sometimes it's dramatic. Then you have the frustration of professors that are teaching good school and good vet welfare requirement because we have knowledge coming up. But when you go in the real life, what is demanded by what I'm responsible for, so the legislation about this, so what you should do as a vet, very little is demanded to you for welfare as a vet, and very little responsibility per se. So my answer is, the role of vet should be enhanced, and we have now the moment to discuss this and to be discussed for Brussels, to get that, despite what Joe said, I would not ask to a vet. I think the answer to Joe is also, vet have not been trained to provide answer. Was not foreseen. Except signing a certificate when you live with a journey log, a transport over 8 hours. In the legislation of today, there is very little for a vet to be done for welfare. It's not logic for me. This will be core of the reform.
So that will definitely show in the next legislative proposal. Any question from the floor on that particular aspect? Yes, please. Hold on, the mic's coming your way.
Hi, thank you. I'm Paula Andres for Euractiv. And I wanted to ask Andrea, but also I'd be happy to hear if other speakers want to answer. I have 2 questions. First, do you think we can advance in animal well-being if we don't decouple animal welfare from productivity and the growth mindset? And the second question is, do you think the Commission will be able to reach a social agreement on putting animal welfare first, and how? Thank you.
So, Andrea. And we have 5 minutes left.
Yeah, it's not only for me indeed, because Tom and many others here can say a lot about this. The first one, yeah, that's the big thing. The sustainability is the word there. Decoupling from productivity, and this was my sentence provoking, and Roxanne noted it immediately. Sometimes you have moral choice that decouple sustainability from what is the next. So will we be brave enough to do it, or will be good to do it from the EU point of view, is a question on the table today. So I cannot answer myself, because the dynamic is sophisticated, and will come also from a process that is also political. Because is this Second question, I mean, because I have only 5 minutes. Clear cut. The component now of welfare exists. Was not existing comparing to today, if I think about what was the dialogue between the parties of the past. So this answers to the fact that is getting front line. Because this is a real, like a big elephant. I mean, there is so much component in welfare that is connected with the ethical way of being relating to the others that makes this also the difference when you have to respect a vegetarian and you have someone for dinner. No? So you have to serve something at your desk, at your table, that is respecting the mental approach to it. And that's, for me, a big shift in the way we discuss this issue today. I hope I'm answering in this.
Would anybody else like? Yeah.
Yeah, very briefly on that first question, yes, but you have to be very careful about it. A farmer will quite happily just randomly spend €10,000 on a cow brush that will have absolutely no impact on productivity. But the problem is if you want widespread change, if you do want more complicated animal welfare improvements that are detached from production, you have to take into account socioeconomic factors, the farmer's ability to pay, the farmer's return on investment, the size of the farmer, et cetera, et cetera. And the best way that national bodies can do that is simply by providing the funds to do that. I would love to see a grant aid on a cow brush. I'd have about 4 of them, just for the crack. But.
Meta.
Also, I think, it's both about the carrot and the whip, right? So we need to, when we develop this and when we give incentive to do it, we still need enforcement of the decisions we make. So enforcement is really important. As vets, we've seen that with the Article 25 about the regular vet visits from the animal health law, that we still need a lot of implementation of a really good decision taken. So be careful that we don't decide too much and then we don't enforce it. We need enforcement.
Please, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I agree very much that, implementation and enforcement are crucial, but also Thomas is right. You really do need to have funding of transition. It has been quite remarkable in the last years that the funding that has been available under the old cap for animal welfare improvements, there's been very little uptake of it by member state governments. That needs to change. That needs to change. We have new eco schemes. We have possibilities of funding being used to help farmers transition to systems. I don't believe it's a lack of goodwill on the part of farmers. I really don't. I think we just need to have the priority has need to be shifted to A, having systems with better animal welfare, and B, providing the finance and the opportunities to actually be able to put those things in place.
As Meta said, the carrot and the stick. So I'd like to thank all of you for your contribution to this discussion. Thank you very much. I know we could have continued. We have another panel where I'm sure we will touch upon some of these issues as well. So thank you very much for joining us. A big round of applause for our speakers. And I now would like to invite the speakers of the next panel to join us on stage, please. It's terrible, isn't it? It's just so high. No, anywhere. Right, so welcome. You had an opportunity to quickly stretch your legs between your seats and the seats on stage. So we now have with us for our second panel, Birte Stenberg, who's the Secretary General of AVEC, the Poultry Meat Sector Association, Claire Fowler, who's the Vice President of Animal Health Europe, Antonio Velarde, who is the head of animal welfare at the Catalan Institute of Agri-Food Research and Technology, and Joe Moran, who's the director of the European Policy Office of 4Pols. Welcome to all four of you. And we've talked about in the previous panel about possible measures, possible solutions on how to improve welfare, how to put things in place to help prevention as well. But there are still quite a few hurdles in order to implement better welfare. And what are those hurdles is really what we're going to be looking at in this particular panel. Definitely, and it's been mentioned, the EU is recognized as having the highest animal welfare standards in the world. But do you see that the main barriers to even higher standards, where are they? I mean, we could have even higher standards. It's been discussed as well. So where are these higher standards? Where are the barriers to these higher standards? And each of you from your own point of view. So Birte, from the point of view of producers.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to this very important panel. I'm a 57-year-old vet, so apparently I don't know so much about animal welfare. I've just learned. I will say the same as Mette. We were actually taught about animal welfare in vet school back in the last millennium. Anyway, seen from the producer's perspective, I think that we should take a whole new angle to look at animal welfare, because Andrea is going to have a T-shirt where it says when citizens become consumers, they are not concerned about animal welfare anymore, and unfortunately, it is true. And DG Agri, they foresee, and I now take my own turf poultry as an example, they foresee that the poultry meat consumption in Europe will go up with 5% until 2030. So we need the poultry meat, apparently. And then if we, in the farm to fork strategy, will limit the production of poultry meat in Europe, then we are going to source it from other parts of the world where animal welfare is not as big an issue as it is here in Europe, because they are still thinking more about human welfare. We have come so far in our evolution, or so to speak, that we have the resources and the time, and we can talk about animal welfare, and so we should. And as a vet, animal welfare is very important to me. So if we can educate the consumers to pay more for their products when they go to the supermarket, then I can tell you the producers will be more than happy to produce with higher animal welfare, as long as they can get paid. Because you see, they are not in this for charity. Their children also need school books. So there we are. There is a market out there, and we need to be able to sell the product, so the consumers has to be ready to buy. Thank you.
Claire, the hurdles, but from the point of view of a solution provider.
I feel like I'm on a little bit of a confessional, being a 45-year-old vet, and whether I actually.
I think we should do. I think we should do a show of hands, you know.
But joking aside, I'm trying to remember if we learnt about animal welfare in university, which is probably not a good start. But let's talk about it from the animal health sector. I think it's really clear that animal health is one of the key domains related to animal welfare. And we've also, alongside animal welfare, made also significant developments in the availability of solutions, medicines, vaccines from our sector out into the wider area. What's really important is that we continue to ensure that availability of those products, to manage animal health, to provide solutions to diagnose, recognize, and treat disease. Because just picking up on what Andrea said earlier, being sick is not a happy place. Being sick is bad. We need to talk about the fact that we want to talk about health being a positive, but we also need to remember that the negative is also a place that we don't want to go back to, and we need to manage this.
Antonio, the point of view of a scientist.
Thank you.
And you're not a vet, right?
Yes, I'm a vet.
You are a vet as well, so there we are. That's it. We're just going to continue, you know.
27 years old vet. But I started to learn animal welfare in the vet school also, I think.
So there's hope, there's hope.
Yeah,
that's good.
There's hope. I think the main barriers has already said. I mean, it's the economical impact, the environmental, I mean, the health, that there is some compatibility. If I can say something about the scientific point of view, is also that we need to, I mean, to do more about animal welfare indicator or strategy. I mean, traditionally we have worked, or we have seen the animal welfare from a negative point of view. I mean, how to prevent negative animal welfare. And all the efforts, all the science has been done to this. But, I mean, there is also positive animal welfare. And I think this is also a change of paradigm, no? To identify the positive welfare in the animal and how to promote this positive animal welfare. I think this can also change and help also to improve and to overcome this barrier in animal welfare.
Thank you. So, Joe, from the point of view of an animal welfare group, what are the key hurdles?
And not a veterinarian. I feel like that's like a confession on this panel, I must admit.
That's okay, nobody blames you for that.
Well, I'm blaming myself. I would identify three things. First of all, opposition from some quarters in terms of getting to animal welfare. Some quarters of the industry have set their faces completely against any change at all on this. And that is a barrier over which we have to come. And I think that's we need to find areas of compromise. We need to find areas where we can, perhaps agree to disagree, but to do so in a way that we at least maintain open dialogue and look at how we can move forward. Secondly, I would say support for farmers who do want to move forward in terms of animal welfare. And this relates also to the question on pricing. We need to ensure that farmers are properly supported in the transition. At the moment, that has not been the case, or it hasn't necessarily been the case with previous reforms. We've seen pretty poor enforcement of animal welfare laws hitherto, and part of the reason of that is that farmers, as Thomas touched on earlier, are trying to make ends meet themselves. We need to be much better at incentivizing moving forward with animal welfare, and I think that this is something that we should certainly build on with the next Common Agricultural Policy, looking at the one we've got now with animal welfare finally being in eco schemes, and also with enabling citizens to be able to properly choose higher welfare products with proper labeling on products. This is something as well that we know can work. It hasn't always worked brilliantly, but it can work. Several civil society organizations, not for paws, but others in Europe do run successful labeling schemes, and they are successful. Consumers do recognize that the products on offer are from higher welfare schemes and buy accordingly. But also, the one case that we have, of course, in point that is now mandatory Europe-wide is the case of shell egg labeling. And that proved to be a massive hit in terms of the growth of almost now near extinction in terms of some of the cage systems. And then the third point would be on the trade aspect. And this is one area where I think many people in this room will agree. We need to ensure that farmers in Europe aren't penalised or aren't hurt from competition outside of the EU. As we move forward on this issue, we have to ensure that basically stuff that's sold in Europe has to meet European standards. And if we don't do that, we're in deep, deep trouble, and that would constitute a massive barrier.
Thank you very much. Birte, where do you think the biggest opportunities lie in terms of moving forward for improving animal welfare?
Well, when it comes to the upcoming legislative proposal, I really think one of the key factors would be outcome-based animal welfare indicators. There we have already some very good examples on how that had worked. I come from Denmark, and in Denmark, again, poultry, sorry, but their foot pad lesions have been measured for a long period of time, and that has really made the foot pad lesions in the country go very much down. So we have good examples on how outcome-based animal welfare indicators can work in a really good way. So I think that's the way to go forward. And as Joe said, and thanks a lot for that, there can be very, very good animal welfare on very big farms. There can be poor animal welfare on small farms where all the prerequisites actually are there. So I think it's really important that we look at the outcome, because animal husbandry is also key here. So if we look at the outcome, then we see the true animal welfare.
Thank you. Claire, we've heard mentions of technology as part of solutions for the better welfare of animals. Do you have a few examples that you could share with us, examples of technology that could support a better welfare?
Yeah, so if we look at animal welfare again from animal health, the question is, how do we improve the animal health through the technologies? And actually, this is an area which in the recent years has really exploded in terms of the availability of different solutions. Everything from how do you actually vaccinate the animals and the provision, for instance, of needle-free devices to avoid actually injecting the animals, through to actually what is then much more about the management of the disease and the early recognition of the disease. So specifically, sensors in barns, but sensors in barns which measure activity levels, understanding then also when animals are coming into season so that they can effectively be mated earlier. This, as you can imagine, then allows the farmers and the vets together in cooperation to think about how they can better then manage that environment. It's not always that easy, though, because you can imagine you come with a new technology. Sometimes these new technologies also provide huge amounts of data. And the question is, you have the data, what do you do next? And that is where then it needs to be a really holistic discussion between all the different players, including the solution providers, so some of these technologies, through the veterinarians, through the farmers, and also understanding then ultimately what is the benefit. So that benefit has to be really also addressed and shown in real life for those technologies to be adopted.
Thank you. Antonio, both Sean and Andrea earlier mentioned practices that still exist despite regulation, despite all the changes that have been taking place. And we still see things like tail docking and so on. And that's in Europe, despite the legislation. So why do you think that is? I mean, is it a lack of awareness, a lack of education, of information? And what can we do?
I think this is tricky because it's correct that, I mean, the ban of routine tail docking is in the legislations. I mean, since, I mean, when it was, but it's not really applied. I mean, it's true that there is some countries where this is banned, that tail docking is routine, Sweden or Finland, but in most of the countries there is still as routine practice. But nevertheless, it's true that the tail docking, I mean, may reduce the risk of tail biting, but does not prevent it, because, I mean, there is still the need of the animal to explore. If they have not the possibility to explore, they can, I mean, they will redirect this behavior to the tail of the neighbor. But I think the main issue here is that there is some problems in husbandry and management. Also, you should go to this and to solve what is doing this. I mean, now, I mean, we have to assess which are the factors leading to the tail biting. I mean, the current space allowance, the density that is now, I mean, is an stimulation for tail biting. I mean, reducing the density, increasing the space allowance is a reduction of the risk. I mean, the enrichment is also important, because this is not toys to play for the animals. This is just to fulfill the behavioral needs, the need for exploring. Also, we need to pay attention of these risk factors that will reduce the tail biting. And I think this is crucial. I think now there is more pressure to put and to do this risk assessment individually in the farm, try to prevent. Also, you have to find the solution, and then you can increase. And I think this will be an action in the future.
Thank you. Joe, You mentioned consumer behavior, and it's been touched upon by several of our speakers since we started this morning. And I'd like you to go maybe a little deeper into that purchasing behavior. How can, I mean, consumers do change their behavior. They care about animal welfare, but it is true that when they go to the supermarket, cost is the first thing they look at. And especially with the current crisis in terms of the cost of living. So how can we raise consumer awareness of the benefits of higher welfare? You mentioned labeling schemes. That's an example. You said they work well. Now, other solutions, how can we help consumers be more aware and maybe encourage them to pay more, which is very, very difficult, particularly in the current context?
Or we try and keep the costs down. And this is where I think the next Common Agricultural Policy is absolutely key. Of course, the cost of living crisis at the moment is putting this under renewed focus. Although I'm sure several of us have also seen the inflation figures both from yesterday and also this morning, which have shown a marked drop in the rate of inflation, and it's really beginning to tail off pretty quickly now. So certainly by the time we're looking at these new laws coming in, we also shouldn't necessarily shackle ourselves to current circumstances when we're looking forward to the future. We have to bear in mind that new legislation won't be in place probably till, realistically, 2028. I mean, we probably wouldn't even apply towards the end until the end of the decade, and therefore we shouldn't apply today's problems, as I say, until in terms of tomorrow's challenges. But we can use things like the next Common Agricultural Policy to ensure that farmers essentially aren't having to pass costs onto consumers. We have to make sure that transition periods are there with proper implementable transition periods, so that actually farms can take a phased approach to bringing in the reforms, and that it isn't a kind of big bang one size fits all. We shouldn't be in the situation where the medicine kills the patient, if I can put it that way. In terms of the consumer awareness side, as I've said before, labelling can and should work. It's just about getting it right. I certainly from Forpaw's side, we've had experience of this, and I say we know many other organisations in Europe, whether you look at, for example, Beter Leven in the Netherlands, if you look at Vermeer Tierschutz in Germany, just to mention, but too, there's also L'éthique et bien-être animal in France, which is absolutely fantastic. There are labelling schemes out there which work, and that's what, from our side, has to go hand in hand with those other measures to ensure that consumers have the appropriate knowledge and know what to do to incentivise better welfare.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the room at this stage on that particular aspect of things? Because we have other topics to cover as well, but anything related to what we've just heard, or somebody who'd like to push the question a bit further? No, not at this stage? Yes, Roxanne?
Just to extend the discussion beyond just the panelists, since we have at least one farmer in the room, maybe you could just react to Joe's last comment about getting support from PAC, because it's different. Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, sorry. I use the French acronym, from CAP, and possibly not yet from the market. Is this something acceptable to young farmers or not? Oh, you're here. I was looking for you up there.
He's just too close.
The issue with using CAP for that is CAP is also meant to be doing about 1,000 other things. We're meant to be improving environmental, climate, biodiversity, and then on top of it, animal welfare. And unless CAP expands, it wouldn't be a suitable method for us particularly, because all it will lead to is cuts in other areas. And as young farmers, we're already struggling to get proper funding for generational renewal. Under the last one, it was meant to be a priority, but it slipped down the priorities this time. The market needs to return an investment. It's as simple as that. If it doesn't, then the consumer doesn't really care. And so we can't keep hearing that and I do believe that they do care, but they're not willing to put their money where their mouth is. And also, and I don't think we should be just as simple as and blasé as to say that the consumer doesn't care, because consumer, I mean, is abroad. Some people are struggling to feed their families. Other people are going on 4 holidays a year and happy to spend the money on flights, but not on food. National governments also have a role to play in this. I mean, we have seen, and forgive me, I can only speak English, so I haven't seen the coverage quite in France and Germany and other countries. But even in Ireland and the UK, the attitude towards rising cost of production as a result of what we know are very clear factors in cost of production has been deeply insulting to farmers. The cost of food has gone up because our cost of production have gone up. Yes, there is probably gouging as well happening, but to simply turn around and say that we're going to drop the cost of food production without engaging with the farmers as to why our costs have gone up, that is directly leading to sacrifices on animal welfare, and that is a comment that we have not seen properly from, and I would maybe challenge the animal welfare groups and the animal protection groups as to why they've been so silent on this issue, because it's not good enough for us.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes, Joe.
I think I would agree with a lot of what Thomas has just said, which is why we need to do a lot better with the next cap. But what I will say, at least with this one, is at least we've opened the floodgates a little bit. Because for 60 previous years, the Common Agricultural Policy didn't properly reward welfare at all. Let's face it. It was only in the second pillar, and the amount of money that was spent on it EU-wide was less than 1%. And we've now got, for the first time in the first pillar, over 60 billion euros that have to be spent as part of the basic income for farmers, which can now be used for beginning to move forward in terms of animal welfare improvements. So it's more about building on that, but I do think we've, not to sound too grandiose, crossed the Rubicon in terms of getting animal welfare recognised as an objective properly in the CAP now. The challenge, and that's one thing I'd like to see us collectively work together on, that would be to ensure that we do end up with a bigger, better, stronger CAP that can properly support farmers in this the next time round from 2027 onwards.
Thank you. So, Andrea, I think you have a lot to convey to your colleagues at DG Agri. I don't suppose we have anybody from DG Agri in the room, so Andrea, the onus is on you. Inter-service consultation, now you have a whole list of points to make. Any other question right now about that particular aspect? Okay, so we'll just move on to a couple other aspects. And my next point will be with you, Antonio. As we know, I mean, the EU supports a science-based approach to animal welfare. And do you think that the practice-oriented research is sufficiently taken into account when it comes to legislative changes?
I think yes, but I would like to start this with a comment from Birte that I love it. That is that I mean, she promotes the outcome-based measures. I mean that this is scientific-based, and I think this is a very good approach, because by the end, animal welfare is something inherent from the animal. Also, the best way to assess the welfare of the animal is by indicator, animal-based measure. But we have to find these indicators. I mean, it should be valid and really expressing something on animal welfare, because sometimes there is a confusion about a production indicators, that sometimes the best productions or the growth rate does not tell you that the animal is in a good welfare. Also, I think this is research-orientated, and I think this should be a good approach. I mean, to have indicators on the animal, and then how to protect the welfare. It should be environmental-based and management-based, but this is a good starting point. And I think, I mean, we start with fundamental research. I think the fundamental research is also practice-orientated, because the fundamental research is when you identify what are the behavioral needs, what the animal need, and how to measure this, but then how to apply this in commercial conditions is the next step. But to do this, you need already commercially husbandry system to do this. I mean, when you are indicating where to go, I mean, for example, I mean, when there was several years ago, because I think this is cycle, when there was the ban of gestating housing, in the stall housing in gestation for sows. I mean, there was to move in group housing, but there was not already the applied research because there was not a lot of farms in group housing. Also, the applied research or the practice research is going on with the movement of this change in facilities and in management practice. Also, I think it should be together. And I think that research is not commitment of the public funding or of the DG Santé, of the financial public bodies, or of the research institute, but it should be also a commitment from the companies and the association, because it should be seen as a business strategy. I mean, to do research and to do applied research in animal welfare, as it is done also in other fields. Also, this is, I think, research is a responsibility for all of us.
Birte, you mentioned in the beginning the current trend and the necessity to make changes in some farms, and as we've been hearing since this morning, changes in farms are presented as inevitable answer to better animal welfare. But we've also heard from Thomas that there is resistance from some farmers, generally the younger ones and the older ones for different reasons. We've also heard the fact that we need better CAP funding to help that transition. But Sean said that the benefits are clear, even if they take a little bit of time. So taking all these remarks into consideration, how easy or how difficult is it to make such changes on farms?
Well, it's definitely not easy. It demands quite a lot of funding. And sometimes I think about what is it that actually there are still some young people who goes into farming today. Not enough. You know, the average age of a farmer, Sean, you have to, Thomas, you'll have to help me. It's 53 in Europe now? 58. That's even older than me. So we have a problem with getting young people to go into the farming community. And why is that? You said that they're working 18 hours a day. That could be one reason. Another reason could be that they are seen as people with horns and tails. They go into the business because they want to put pain to animals. I mean, this is so untrue. There is really a problem with the narrative around farming, agriculture, and food production as we speak. If you want people to make changes, you're not doing it by blaming and shaming them. You're doing it by intensifying with the CAP. Yes, 27, I'm in. Let's work together. And I really would like to use this occasion to say to the animal welfare protection organizations, we need to get into a much closer dialogue. And we need to be willing to compromise from both sides. Because we have seen the narrative here in Brussels especially is really so against farming, so against food production. I saw on YouTube recently, there was a demonstrant for some climate action who was interviewed about climate change, and he said he had the solution. We should just forbid all farming because that was what caused all the climate change. And I mean, that's really an illustration for me to how far the citizens/consumers have moved away from knowledge of food production, right? So we need to re-educate in schools, in universities, whatever, so people can understand where their food comes from, and that might also be an incentive for them to pay a bit more for their food. So for the farmers to change, encourage them, give them incentives, give them funding to be able, and give them a fair transition period.
Joe, I'd like to pick up on what Birte just said, and indeed, the challenges are huge because reconciling the views is probably an essential part to the solution to abolishing some of those hurdles that you mentioned in your first intervention. So how do you see that happening? Dialogue, compromise, better preparation, more or a better mutual understanding? How could that work?
I need to be careful here because I was both saddened and heartened yesterday to see a press release out from COPA, essentially claiming that the Commission hadn't done a proper impact assessment on the phasing out of cages, which is exactly what they're doing at the moment. I mean, blaming someone for something that they're currently doing, I find a little odd. But on the one thing that did hearten me to some degree was the last line from Miguel Angel from COPA, chair of their working group on animal welfare, where he said, and I'm quoting almost verbatim, it's not necessarily the end phase that we want to get to that there's a problem with, it's how we get there. And that's where I think we need to find compromise. That's where we need to be saying that, yeah, as I said, the medicine doesn't have to kill the patient here. The other thing is there has to be, and this I would just put in the context, although me and Beata might be going around lobbying together soon on CAP 2027, which should be a wonderful sight. But I do also want to just say that we should also remember that food doesn't equal meat. And much of the future, whether we're talking about animal welfare, quite frankly, or not, it will also be focused on a greater shift to plant-based diets. Meat consumption, as I'm sure most of us know, has doubled since early 1960s. And you can almost draw a line that goes along with that in terms of growth of obesity, growth of diabetes, growth of certain cancers, growth of heart disease. Everyone from the WHO downwards would be saying that meat consumption is currently too high and is currently, frankly, unsustainable as well. Now, this is why I'm saying we shouldn't necessarily conflate one with the other here. And also, we shouldn't be saying that somehow, I agree totally with what Beata said, farmers should not be demonized in any way, shape, or form. They provide what's on our plates, but that isn't just meat. And they should certainly be encouraged and helped where possible to be supported in a general behavior change by citizens in terms of or a large-scale reduction, at least, in terms of the overall meat that's consumed with that.
Beata, yes.
Well, I can say, Joe, that we're not going to lobby together on nutrition because I really, the obesity, and believe me, I know about it, is not because of more meat necessarily. It's because of much easier access to a high processed food that you can go and put directly into your mouth without preparing it. That there's a lot of different studies in that. So let's not go there. But animal protein is really a very important part of a healthy and sustainable diet. And I will say, I will agree that much, that in the Western world, our meat consumption is a bit up. I can say that we, here in Europe, we consume around 63 kilos of meat per year. In the US, it's 103. So, yeah, we are on a good path already here in Europe. And I think that one of the things that we should focus on here in Europe is that we have a very, very fantastic culinary heritage, which I'm sorry if there's any Americans in the room, but maybe they don't have that so much over there. And if we have animal protein in our diet, it really gives us a lot of advantages to not having it. And there are several places in the world where they need much more animal protein in their diets. And therefore, I sometimes really find it peculiar that we want to reduce the production of animal protein here in Europe, where we actually produce it with the lowest emissions in the world, we're going to lower our production while they are really needing it other places in the world. That's difficult to understand. May I give an example?
Very quick one,
Very
then,
quick
because
one.
that's not the topic of our discussion.
So okay, then I'll drop it. But yeah, there's a very good video on YouTube about it on Meet the Facts. So go in and have a look.
Thank you. Claire, to touch upon another aspect of things, we have pretty open access to animal health products here in Europe, and of course it's necessary to animal welfare, as we've seen since the beginning of this morning. But what's your view on the demand to decrease the use of antibiotics or calls to restrict the use of some priority antibiotics? I mean, the use of antibiotics has drastically dropped over the last 20 years, I think, by 47%. So it's a really drastic drop. So how do you see these demands being made?
I mean, it's obvious, right? As an animal health industry, as a partner in animal health, we want our products to be used in a responsible way. So that includes the class of antibiotics. At the same time, we want to make sure that those products are available when they're needed to manage disease. And so, as you mentioned, we've seen a significant drop in many countries, a significant drop, 47% on average over the last 10 years. And that's been by the introduction of new solutions, by the introduction of vaccines, often which are able to substitute to a large extent the use of some classes of product. So we need to manage this going forward, and at the same time we need to say, yes, you can have targets. That could be an approach. We've seen also stricter controls in some countries in order to manage this, and this has these benefits of reducing overall antibiotics. It's important, though, that we remember that these antibiotics are treating diseases. So we need to preserve the use of antibiotics as a requirement of treating diseases and therefore inevitably managing welfare as well.
Thank you. Do we have questions from the audience at this stage? Yes, please. So, Yasmin, the gentleman with the blue shirt there.
Hi there, Josh Loeb from Vet Record. I just had a question about the End the Cage agenda in the EU, and I just wondered whether this is one of those situations, as often happens, where we need a clear definition of what we mean by cage, because animals that are farmed, they will by definition be kept confined. So are we sticking to a very narrow definition, or is it going to be a broader definition? And then on that note, I mean, I thought it was interesting. I was reading a book recently by a chap called Alex Simmons, who's a former deputy chief vet in the UK. It's quite similar to Sean's book in some ways. And Alex Simmons, so I was always under the impression that free-range eggs were better for welfare than eggs from caged hens. But Alex Simmons in his book actually makes the argument that in some ways you could argue that the eggs from caged hens are better for welfare. And I think his argument is basically that the birds, the layer hens in the cages, they are more confined, so they flap about less, so therefore they sustain fewer bone fracture injuries, so therefore they suffer less pain, so therefore it's better for their welfare. So I wondered if you could comment on that.
Please, Antonio.
I can try to comment. I don't know if this is the answer you are looking for, because I mean when I am in the EFSA panel and we have doing these EFSA opinions, and there was one of the questions was about the welfare impact of the cage, but there is not a clear definition, as you already say, about what is a cage, because I mean there is several definitions, but the definition says that is any enclosure that prevent the behavioral needs of the animal, also pen, it will be a cage. Also, we have tried to escape from the cage terminology, because I mean, there is not a scientific definition, and also we have introduced the concept of any enclosure and the minimum requirements of any enclosure to prevent the welfare problems of the animals. Also, the idea of the cage, I agree that it's not a clear definition for this. And on the other question about the eggs and the welfare of the line hens in cage or not, I mean, you have to assess the animal welfare from a multidisciplinary and an overall perspective. I mean, animal welfare is feeding, good housing, behavioral, and health. Maybe in the cage, some aspect might be better. I mean, you may have a better health inspection, but other aspect like the behavioral needs, if they cannot perch or if they cannot explore, also they will be. I mean, they cannot do this behavioral. So it's important always when assessing the welfare to do from a more overall perspective.
Would somebody else like to add something? Joe wants something. Yeah, Joe, yeah. Okay. So, Birte, do you want to add something on that particular question? No? Okay, so, yeah, Joe, please.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a question actually that something that really hasn't come up. It's something that I would like to have brought up in the other panel. You know, I think it certainly has been unfair to be demonizing farmers or even demonizing animal protection organizations, because it is something that, you know, we need to think about what is actually best for the animal and what is actually going to actually have any kind of profit for farmers as well, to be able to combine the two things. I guess one of the issues right now is that a large part of the production systems are designed around productivity, not around the needs of animals. The one thing that I haven't heard mentioned here today is the way in which animals are being selectively bred for productivity and the impact that has on animal welfare. Pigs, one example, I guess, is, you know, you're now having pigs that are being sows that are being selected to effectively have more piglets than they actually have teats to feed them. And then the question is, why do we have such high piglet mortality when that's an issue? But also within the poultry industry, you know, the whole problem, which is one of the greatest problems, I think, in poultry production, is having animals that are bred to selectively bred to grow so quickly that they're suffering from terrible physical problems as a result of the selective breeding. And also, healthier animals, better bred animals might require fewer antibiotics. So I really like to hear a bit more from the panel on this whole issue of what needs to actually be done within the industry to select differently, as well as the other externalities of flooring or light, etc. Okay, you want to go first?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sorry I can't answer the questions on pigs because there needs to be another person for that. But for poultry, I can tell you that nearly half of the traits they are selected for in the breeding of poultry today are animal welfare traits. You mentioned during the panel that the poultry, the broilers today have severe leg problems. It's not true. They had 20 years ago. This problem has been solved. They are growing fast. That is true, and many people see that as a huge issue. But I mean, it's not. I mean, there are several investigations going on the fastness of the growth, and they are improving the traits all the time in the breeding companies. The breeding companies have not been very transparent until now, I admit that. They are going there, so they really can show that they are also breeding for animal welfare. It is true, of course, that they are also breeding for productivity. They are. But with animal welfare, they are very much aware of the social license that we need to have. I really like that wording from the last panel. So they understand that animal welfare is a very important part. And another thing we haven't mentioned in the debate is sometimes animal welfare goes against environmental sustainability. And slower growing breeds of birds, they have a higher greenhouse gas emission impact than the faster growing. So there we also need to find the balance. And I'm not saying that we should just go on as we do. I think we should get a good dialogue, a good discussion, and find the right balance between environmental sustainability, social sustainability, including both the ethics and animal welfare, but also the affordability, because economic sustainability is also very important.
Antonio, do you want to come in on that particular aspect of breeding?
I think it's important. I heard, for example, that the genetics they include welfare traits in the, but I agree that it should be more transparent, because it's difficult to know which welfare traits and what they are assessing, and if these really welfare traits are really improving the welfare. I may say, I mean, this from the fast growing, there is clear evidence that fast growing reduce the mobility of the animals by the end of the last days, and also they have more prone to some locomotory activities. But I think it has been a change now in the genetics should be also look for the welfare and should be more open, and for the sows and for the hyperprolific sows, I think it should be also this way. And I think there is also a 10, because I mean the uterus is the size is the same. If there is more piglets inside, I mean the size is less. They are more. I mean, the weight is less. I mean, there is more prone to have mortalities, and I think it's important to have this into the sustainability of the production. But I'm aware that the genetics they are improving the welfare, but I think it's important to be more open about this. Yeah.
A very quick point, Birte, please.
Very quick point. When the Commission gave EFSA the mandate to go to make the opinions on animal welfare on the different breeds, a week after, we sent a letter to the director of EFSA, Bernhard Uhl, saying that we are more than willing to come up with all the data we have. We represent the breeding companies as well. That we would be happy to go into discussions, come up with experts and so forth. And there was a very, very little demand from the EFSA side. And only in the end of the discussions, we were able to get our breeding experts in. So they are willing to be transparent. Invite them. Thank you.
I don't know if we can finish with it, but they were invited, and we sent some question that it has never replied by the. Yeah.
Claire, from your point of view, and maybe the link between breeding and the use of less antibiotics?
I think it's clear, I said it before, as an industry we want to have the sustainable use of products. So anything that we can do to overall manage disease in a better way, we have to say that as an industry, this is the direction we need to go.
I'll continue with our speakers and give you the opportunity for another round of questions in a few minutes. But I'd like to go back to you, Joe. And we heard from Thomas earlier on about the training of farmers and the fact that the current generation of young farmers has access to more or better education than the previous generations did. But modern-day farmers are still not necessarily very aware of animal welfare needs or animal welfare expectations from the other side. So how can we improve that? How can we work with the farming world to improve that?
Yeah, I'm not so, if I can clarify maybe on the sweeping generalization, I know that some farmers might not be. I think there are some farmers who are very conscious of this and who want to move in the right direction. As I said earlier on, farmers are going to need time to adapt to the changes, but they're also going to need training. Now, there is some training that's already ongoing. We know that the Commission's had the best training for safer food programs. We know that through national contact point centres. I think there are also unsung heroes I don't know whether there are any in this room at the moment, but farm animal welfare councils that exist as well in member states are very important here and often do fantastic work in passing on information to farms. But more needs to be done in this area. And it's one area, actually, I think, where we can also harness the power of technology and use that in better training. And also, it's one area where I would like to see more done from some areas of civil society. I think some of our organisations, I think we could also help in some of those areas, and we don't necessarily do enough. Sometimes we're a bit hands-off, and I think that's, you know, it's fair to criticise us when we can do more in those situations.
Thank you. Antonio, among the various recommendations that are made to farmers in order to improve animal welfare, there's a few points that I'd like to quote. So increasing space allowance, keeping animals in stable groups from an early age, using slower growing breeds. So there's just a few, these are just a few of the points. How can such improvements be implemented in farms? We've heard about more support from CAP, maybe more education, more information. So how do you think these points can be implemented in the various farms? And how is the cost going to be covered? I mean, we come back to the consumer question, but also to the support question, more support from the CAP so that we don't have to put the onus of the extra cost on consumers. So where do you see a balance there?
This is a risk management decision. I'm more used for the risk assessment, but anyway. I think you have to take this welfare into consideration from a sustainability point of view. Also, when you are increasing the space allowance, you have to be aware that, I mean, for the same number of animals, you will need more land. I mean, this might have some environmental impact when you are reducing the growth, I mean, to less faster growing. You have more activity, more feed consumption. They might have also some impact of the CO2. So you have to assess this in an overall assessment, and I think this is important to take into consideration. I mean, what we are talking is from the animal welfare point of view, but the other aspect, I think they are important. But from a general point of view, I think there is, and talking in relation to the cost of the welfare improvement, I mean, some measures might be expensive, but there are others that they may be low cost measures. I mean, and when you are identifying the hazard or the main hazard of most of the welfare problems, the staff, the training, the knowledge, I mean, is an important factor also. Sometimes training in animal welfare and in identifying the behavioral needs of the animals for the people working with the animals directly, I think this is a good and cost-benefit strategy to solve some welfare problems. Others might be more expensive, I mean, like the other. But I think it's important to make emphasis on this, that with low intervention, with low cost, you may have more benefit in animal welfare.
Thank you. Claire, I'd like to raise another question with you on a different topic, but how about the availability of animal health products? I mean, we're pretty much everything is available here in Europe, but are you aware of barriers to access to certain products, and are we served just as well as other parts of the world, or are other parts of the world served better, if I may put it like that?
So I think you're right in saying that we have a broad range of products available here in the EU. Some things we don't have in the EU, and you have to ask yourself, why don't you have them in the EU? And it come from as simple as the disease has not been present in the EU. So for instance, we haven't, as an industry, licensed a vaccine, including the European manufacturing regulations requirements for the EU. So we have examples where a disease is present outside of the EU, it will come into the EU, and then inevitably there will almost be a lag as then the industry can catch up work, license, and then actually manufacture the product for the EU. The other topic that relates to the EU is obviously also related to trade policies. What happens in case we want to vaccinate, national governments decide to vaccinate. There's a very live discussion at the moment around avian influenza. But then, for instance, will we as an industry bring in all those products? We have to then discuss this and be part of the discussion around the solution related to these diseases. And then as well, within Europe, there's many discussions about other legislation. So for instance, the chemical legislation, the PFAS topic that's coming in, which does also impact our industry. And what's important to make sure is that we also maintain that right to have these products within the animal health space. I'm fortunate to work in a company which works both in the human pharma as well as in the animal health area. And if you talk to our colleagues from the human pharma space, they like to say that our industry is complicated, because actually if you look at the range of products and medicines and services we develop and deliver into the market, it's numerically much higher, and actually from a range of technologies, actually quite different and quite diverse. And so that's why it's also important when we look at the regulatory environment within Europe that we also touch on topics as for instance, the fee structure for our products, should they be the same as with these increases as going through at the moment? Because this may also in time create a barrier to the provision of veterinary medicines here in Europe as well.
Thank you. Do we have a final question from the room? Because we're nearing our closing time. Yes, we have a question at the very back.
Yeah, thanks to the panel. It's sort of coming again towards looking at the definition of welfare, and I think...
I'm sorry, could you please introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, yeah. I'm Subwan. I'm from Radboud University, where I'm doing my PhD on animal and biodiversity governance. And I think Antonio mentioned this sort of move away from a focus on negative welfare to incentivizing positive welfare. And I was wondering what the hurdles are to sort of policy and practice being adaptive, so that, you know, better welfare standards aren't enshrined in new legislation, but then they're set in stone for the next 20 years and not adapting to advances in science and what we know about animals. Yeah, so if you have any comments on those, not just you, but the whole panel, on hurdles to it being adaptive and not being set in stone for the next 20 years.
Thank you. So, adaptive policy. Yes, Joe?
Good question. And I think this is why we are so happy with the direction that the Commission seemed to have set on this. And I would give massive kudos to Andrea and his colleagues for going down this road. It's clear that what is being envisioned is not so much a step to a single standard. It's a toolbox. It's future-proofed. It's something that will essentially allow the Commission, from then the point of adoption of these new laws, to add to them, adapt to them, change them, tweak them going forward based on EFSA and prevailing scientific opinions as is needed. And it's also, again, I think goes hand in hand with the question we're arguing or trying to answer collectively here, which is how we can also minimize and get over some of those barriers. And again, we don't have to take a big bang approach, therefore, necessarily. We should be working with prevailing science. Science has to guide us and has to be the standard that ultimately takes us step by step on this journey. And that should mean that, yeah, we don't have to kind of jump straight from A to Z. We can, you know, go from step by step through this journey in a more managed way than we might otherwise be able to. But certainly, yeah, what we anticipate, I'm saying this now very much from the civil society perspective, is essentially a framework for change. It's not a kind of, you know, not the equivalent of the animal welfare 10 commandments that are going to be given down to us and then we have to obey them from here until the end of time. No, it's going to be far more adaptive than that. And If that's not what it looks like, I'm going to look like an idiot, but I'm also going to be phenomenally disappointed. I know Andrea's shaking his head. Perhaps I'm on the right line.
Thank you very much. I think that's a wrap. So thank you very much, all four of you, for a very rich exchange. And just like the previous panel, I'm sure we could have continued this conversation, but you can continue it over lunch in a few minutes. So thanks very much for joining us this morning. Thank you. You're very welcome to stay here for the concluding remarks if you'd like. I mean, no problem. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've now come to the end of our morning, and I will invite the president of Animal Health Europe to deliver some concluding remarks, but also some key takeaways, maybe. So please welcome Rob Kelly.
So first of all, I'd like to thank all the great speakers today. I think you'd have to agree it was a very rewarding and stimulating discussion. And I want to thank Roxanne and all the team for putting together what I thought was a truly tremendous forum. I also think it's great to also recognise and see that the important role that animal health plays working in partnership with veterinarians to support what we're trying to do in terms of animal welfare. And I also want to thank a lot of the speakers. I found them all very stimulating, but one of the ones that probably triggered the most memories for myself was from Dr. Wensley earlier this morning when he talked about animal happiness. And I wanted to share a personal story of one of my first ever employers. He was a man called Bob McPhillany. He's unfortunately not with us anymore today. But he owned Kawana Farms, which is a long way from here. Kawana Farms is in central New South Wales, which is about a day's drive from Sydney. He had a reasonably modest-sized farm for that part of the world. I live in the city of Dublin right now, which is 120 acres. His farm was a modest-sized farm, about 100,000 acres, so about the size of Dublin. He had, in terms of that region, a very small cattle herd of about 250 animals, but a medium-sized sheep flock for that part of the world of just over 20,000 sheep. When I first started working for Bob, I just graduated from Hawkesbury Ag College, and I thought I knew everything about animal health production and performance, because that's what I was trained to learn. But it wasn't until I worked for Bob that I first understood and appreciated the need to understand happiness of animals on a farm. He's the first person who ever coached or trained me in terms of animal welfare. We talk a lot about educated farmers today. Bob never finished school. But I learned more about animal welfare from Bob than I did from any professor at Hawkesbury Ag College. You sometimes question how you understand and learn about individual animal care on a farm with 20,000 sheep when technology wasn't what it is today, right? Bob used to carry a notebook in his top pocket, and every animal on that farm, it didn't have a name, but it had a number. And Bob used to write things about those animals. Some of them were very production related. You know, when it last calved, when it last had a lamb, what size lambs did it have, how many lambs did it have, whose its mother was, which ram was it from. But he also had behavioural information about many of those animals also in that notebook, so he could better understand how to manage them on the farm. My point is that I wanted to get across, which I really picked up on today, is we're evolving as an industry. Kawana Farms, the animal production practices on Kawana Farms today is very different to what it was 30 years ago, right? Despite Bob's best understanding of animal welfare then, it's very different to what it is today. The university halls that I walked around at Hawkesbury Ag College in Western Sydney, the education there is very different to what it is today. But also those who came out of that same system I did, our understanding of animal welfare and animal production has certainly evolved over that 30 years as well. So I'm very encouraged as to where we are as an industry. When I first started in animal health, working with veterinarians, our single focus was when do we treat a sick animal and how? But we've really evolved as an industry to better understand how to recognise disease earlier, how to prevent disease, and even have systems and technology in place today to predict disease before it even happens. As our veterinary partners often say, treating sick animals is just one part of our shared story, or a piece of the puzzle. Advances in animal health care are prioritised better welfare, improved disease prevention, as well as earlier diagnosis. Good knowledge and use of modern-day animal health technologies can facilitate better animal husbandry and improve overall animal health and well-being, contributing to a better life for everyone, including every animal. But we know that the access to such tools and training for their use is not always the first thing on a farmer's mind, and many have other issues to handle or even conflicting priorities. But as we discussed today in the first round table, that should never be recognised as an excuse. We also understand that making such investments for change on farms require investments and financing that's not always accessible to farmers, and as we learned today, particularly for our younger farmers. With these thoughts in mind, I'm pleased to inform that you can pick up a copy of the Animal Health Europe's position on the revision of the EU legislation on animal welfare at the reception on your way out today. So I encourage you to grab one of those. You can also grab a copy of our manifesto for the 2024 elections and duration of the new Parliament and Commission. But I'd like just to take a minute to hit 4 key points from that document, which I encourage you to take. First and foremost is we emphasise the importance of the One Health approach in decision making. Secondly, we understand that animal health is a prerequisite for animal welfare. And thirdly, we ensure benefit risk over risk only process in policy making. And lastly, but very important point, ensure a balanced dialogue of the future of animal farming by recognising the important contributions of Europe's agri-food sector and supporting fact-based exchanges on livestock health and welfare and sustainability of our food systems. So please be ensured that you grab a copy of that on your way out. With that, again, I want to take the opportunity to thank all of our speakers today. I particularly want to thank Roxanne and your team for facilitating a great forum again this year, and welcome for you all to meet outside for lunch so we can all continue this interaction. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Rob. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. I'm not going to stand between you and lunch. You can continue networking. You can relax now. Lots of food for thought before you get actual food. So, a good start to the rest of the day. Have a very safe trip home for those of you who are traveling. It was a pleasure being with you this morning. So, thank you very much and have a nice rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.